So I will call to order the meeting of the Concord Finance Committee
And I'll call to order,
on Wednesday, February 15th.
and I'll call to order the Concord School Committee on Wednesday, February 15th.
So our agenda today is to review the school budget, to mainly on the Concord Public School side, and look at how that will hopefully come to terms or have a relationship with the guidelines presented by the Finance Committee. We are off right now by about $583,000. And there are many reasons for that. I'll step back a little. There are many reasons for that. We all understand them. We are interested in hearing more detail from the school side and providing an opportunity for the Finance Committee to review and ask detailed questions so that we can work toward a mutual solution to the budgets prior to all-town meeting, which is in April. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Parashar, who is the guideline chair of the Finance Committee.
Well, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because I don't have access to share
It's a little awkward.
slides, but I'll see what I can do in the meantime. First of all, thank you for having us here today as part of the annual process as well. I had a couple slides I wanted to share, and hopefully I'll get them up. I can't log in for some reason. But what we're hoping to do today is to better understand public schools' historical and upcoming trends, both financial as well as strategic and outcomes performance, because that'll be helpful as we consider the broader challenges facing the town from a financial perspective over the next few years. So today we're looking forward to understanding, as I said, the strategic plan, the progress that we've made in meeting the strategic plan objectives, what work lies ahead, because I think it was 18 or 19 through 23 strategic plan, and the anticipated costs that we're going to face to hit those strategic milestones and plan metrics. So hopefully during the discussion, we'll have an understanding of both the financial trends as well as the outcomes for the school. And as I said, I've got a couple slides to share, but
Parashar, can you send them from your phone to Bob and then he could share?
well, that's what I'm going to try to do.
Okay.
So the problem is I didn't have them on my phone. I had them on my computer, which is, so let me see what I can do to send them over there. But maybe in the meantime, I'll just share with you kind of high level the trends that we saw. The 5-year growth rate in total spending, if you take a look at the budget books, right, for CPS was 3.7%. And so that was basically from fiscal year 2019 through fiscal year 2024. And then if you take a look at the growth rates from fiscal year 2024 through 2028 that you all provided in the fall, the CAGR was 2.8%. And so, you know, one of the questions that we had, and I think that's good news, frankly, if the CAGR is dropping, what steps are we anticipating that the schools will take to lower the growth rate, the rate in spending, the growth rate in spending? So that's good news. I think that's one big picture. And then second, there were a number of grants and revolving funds that were understandably used during COVID, right? I mean, we received a lot of funds. We used them. We're assuming that those funds the grants were one-time grants that were used over several years. And so I think we would presumably expect a little bit of a decline in the grants, if you will, and to go back to almost steady state, maybe a little bit higher than what we've had in the past. But as we take a look at the numbers, we're actually seeing a slight increase. And so just kind of curious, maybe you can remind us maybe why the grants, the revolving funds and the circuit breaker numbers, those offsets continue to increase through 2028, because we would have expected a dip, if you will, right? And then as you'll see in terms of the outcomes, based both on what you all shared Monday, your Monday meeting, as well as work that some members of the FinCom have done, we're kind of in the middle of the pack, if you will. And I think this goes, and that's neither good nor bad. I'm not making I'm not passing judgment on it, but when you compare our standings with other towns, we're not the top, we're not the bottom, we're in the middle, and whether that's good or bad, I think it'd be great to hear your perspectives, and then tying it back to the strat plan. Are we comfortable with where we are? And again, not making any judgments, or do we strive to improve or not? And just hearing those perspectives and tying it back to perhaps if we think we should improve, if it's reasonable to improve, because some towns are spending boatloads of money, and maybe that's why they've got high performance. But what are we planning to do? And what's our thought process there? And how does it tie back to the overall trends that we're seeing in the future? So hopefully we can have some conversations to help the Finance Committee better understand some of these aspects. So I don't know, do we want to ask I know the school committee and the Finance Committee, other members to just chime in if they've got additional thoughts?
Sure. I think it might be valuable to, I know you weren't able to share your slides. We do have an extensive amount of data that's been very specifically curated to answer, I think, a lot of these questions that I think we would like to present in order to create a base level foundation of knowledge that we can all operate from. So from my perspective, that would probably be the best way to kick off before we get into the questions, so that, again, we're kind of all operating from the same set of knowledge.
I think it might be useful to, if there are any members of the Finance Committee that have a burning question, in addition to how Parashar summarized it, that you might want to put on the table, this would be a good time to do it, so that as the school committee is responding, we will have already asked some questions rather than asking them after the information has been presented. So is there anyone here? I know I've certainly received a lot of emails from members. Does anyone want to put anything on the table to specifically for a response today, or? Well, okay.
I think we can all do that too.
Then you're good. Good to go.
Okay. With that, we're going to have Dr. Hunter review all of the data about many of the things that Parashar discussed today. Again, and I think that's will be a really good jumping off point for our discussion and debate. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Hunter if court.
Before you begin the presentation, could you share from the school committee's perspective for the audience where the school committee stands vis-a-vis the budget?
Sure. So the superintendent and her administrative team came to us initially in December with their recommended budget. The year-over-year increase for that budget was 5.01%. We put together that budget after the Finance Committee goes through their process to determine what they think an appropriate guideline is. Their guideline, your guideline, I believe came in at about 3.4%. Is that right? 3 point what? 3.3. Okay. Okay. So they came in at about 3.3%. So that left us with a real dollars delta in the $700,000 range. In the time between that December presentation of our first budget at 5.01% increase year over year, our administrative team went back, combed through the budget one more time. They were able to identify two places where we could find money to offset this delta, we were able to come up with about $150,000, which leaves our new budget, our new recommended budget at a 4.7% increase. And in real dollars, that's about $585,000 over what the Finance Committee is recommending to us. So that's where we are today. And Lori Hunter is going to be here to sort of, I'll just be open, honest, and transparent, try to help the community and the Finance Committee understand, why we feel this budget is the appropriate budget to satisfy the demands of our students and the community. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori if no one else has any questions.
Yeah, I have to log into the Zoom, but I have your slide.
Okay, maybe we can just do that for 2 minutes because
Yeah.
hopefully it'll set the stage. And
Sure.
the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the numbers the growth rates I talked about are based on accurate numbers. I pulled some of them from the slides you guys presented on Monday, but I just want to make sure that we're all in agreement of what the actual numbers are, rather than finding out later we've got numbers that don't match. So appreciate the patience.
Well, that's coming up, Alexa, in reference to the 150,000 that we have seen identified that we can use as offsets. Just again, for clarification for the audience, that hasn't determined a new budget on the part of the school committee yet. All of these are discussions underway.
Well, yes.
I think it's important that people know that we haven't changed our December number as of yet.
No, we did. We voted on to accept those two
I
recommendations.
disagree. We voted to accept the report. We have not adopted a new budget, just for clarification. Thank you. Simply because it's a work in progress. I think that was our premise. Am I correct? Indeed, what happened?
We agreed to accept the memo, which was $150,000 less, but we didn't actually technically vote a new
A
budget. But we agreed to accept those savings of 150,000.
So we agree as a committee that those are appropriate savings.
Bob, all set?
Yeah, I just need to share my screen. Yeah, this one's-
Sorry.
Yeah, let me share a full-size version, 1 second, sorry.
Yeah, in the spot. It's You could do it that way and magnify it. Just go here and blow it up a little bit. You could move it.
While we're waiting for that, I would like to say that our rankings and academic performance comparisons with other towns is very interesting, extremely important. But there's years and years of built-up background in those numbers, which I think would be hard to, I know, Dawn, you've dug into this. Others have really dug in. This is, people are digging in 20 years ago. I am more interested, frankly, in looking at this year's budget and seeing how we can start to bring it back closer to our guidelines. I think there are too many variables when we compare to other communities, demographics, historical budget. I think we've in the past tried to figure out if there are differences in the way other communities account for certain costing. So it's very interesting. It's a subject that's been on the table here for at least 20 years, as far as I know, and probably before that. I guess I would prefer to focus on what we're looking at for next year's budget and how we can moderate that and start to taper off any further growth.
Peggy, if I
Yes,
could
Don.
comment, I'd say, I undertook the analysis that I did because I wondered if that could show some reasons why we need to spend above guidelines. If our spending per pupil was out of sync with other towns, that
Mhm.
would be an argument for devoting more resources. Or secondly, if the school committee feels that there is an issue that we need to address in our performance relative to other towns, and therefore we need to spend additional money for a certain amount of town for additional math resources or something. But I haven't heard that. But that's why I dug into that. See, where are we really? And is there something going on that we need to spend money on?
Thank you, Don. And it is a excellent question that we should dig into.
Sure. And I specifically asked for this data to be brought to the public, I think for two reasons. One, again, so that we're all operating from the same set of data. All of the data that we use is DESI data. So it's not our own data. It's not data that's curated one way in one district in
Mhm.
another way. This is all very uniform. The Department of Education applies the formulas that give us this data. So I think that's important. And the second thing is, I did want to make sure to show that our performance is strong. And then two things led me to talk about the rankings and academic performance, or asked Dr. Hunter to do that. Was one that in your meeting, for whatever reason, you guys used regional data to talk about your arguments. So it was important for me that even though this meeting is CPS focused, that we were able to bring to you the narrative to address what was talked about in your meeting. So that's the most important thing. And number two, just so the community has an understanding, because we did get some feedback from community members after that meeting that there was confusion about performance in the schools relative to all that. So I do think that it's important that we have the opportunity to address that. So
Okay.
this, however, it looks long, it's really brief, I promise you that. And then we can go into our discussion of CPS. And the other thing too that's really interesting is the success of CPS and the budgets at CPS are what eventually create these outcomes. So in a way, they're really married anyway.
Mhm.
So to separate them, while I understand for the purposes of our discussion makes a lot of sense, I do think this is really relevant because it speaks to the foundation we're giving kids at CPS to ultimately achieve at the high school level. So I think all of those things are kind of important. So we will be brief with it, but I do want the opportunity
Okay,
for Dr. Hunter to give it.
let's do it.
Okay.
Bob,
You
can
go- you're
just-
first,
yeah,
Patricia.
Can you just put that into full screen mode so that folks can read it and see it? And we'll make copies available too. If you could just go to the next slide, Bob. Yep. So I know it's hard to see back there, but basically the second column, 2019, the total spend was $40.8 million. And then if you go to fiscal year 2024, I think the current request, and I don't know whether this incorporates 150, I took it off the Monday slides, I think, is $49 million basically. And so on an average annual growth rate, that's 3.7% a year. There's a slight decrease in 23 and then an increase to about 4.1% in 2024. And then when you take a look at the projected growth rate, as I said earlier, from fiscal year 24 through 28, it's 2.8%, right? And I just want to make sure that those numbers are accurate and based on what I think either Lori or Bob presented just a couple days ago. Particularly the growth rate, because if we're going from 3.7 to 2.8, that's great. And again, try to better understand how we get there would be helpful.
And I think the other question that we had, Dr. Hunter, is at the discussion on Monday, I think, Carrie, you asked the superintendent, what do you think it is going forward? And I think the percentage was 4%. So that's why we're trying to kind of, how do we reconcile that with the projections data that we had?
Well, I think we just want to be sure to clarify that the top row, and obviously we're just looking at it live with you here, so we're interpreting as we sit here. The top row is gross. It doesn't factor in the grant offsets. So if you factor in the grant offsets, our increases have been 3.6.
Well, so that's the third row, right? So the
Okay,
third row
got
basically
it,
does the
okay.
math. But just again, starting, because that gets to the second question that I raised around the grants, right? You could see the big increase from 3 million to 4 million from 21 to 22. Again, COVID related, I think a lot of those were maybe one-time grants used over a couple of years. I understand there's revolving accounts and circuit breaker built in, but if there was an injection of grants and they're not going to occur in the future, you'd presumably see a drop in the grants, and yet we're seeing, the grants continuing at 4.2, 4.3, 4.4. So trying to better understand what you're anticipating in terms of future grants. Is that being built in, or are you anticipating offsets from higher fees for athletics and all that? Because that then ultimately gives us a sense of how much we need from general
I think we're
revenue.
going to answer a lot of these questions if we go through our slides, and then we can loop to the ones we don't at the end. I just want to be sure for clarity, our percentage increases since 20 have been 3%, 3.5, 2.3, 3.1. We've been.
Those are at the bottom.
Good. Okay.
But again, those percentages, I will push back a little bit, are net of these one-time grants.
Not
And,
exclusively. So I think we'll explain.
fair enough. And
We'll explain
well, and if you take a look at the cost structure on the first line, that's the true cost structure growth,
Okay.
right? That's
We're-
what that is.
We're here to talk about the impact on the town.
Fair
So
enough. And so if you go to the next slide, right, this is something I think Don had put together. And again, just the facts, and these are, I think, many of the same towns. One set of metrics around spending per pupil, and then whether or not the percent meets exceeds. We're neither the highest, we're not the lowest. As I said, we're in the middle. And then the next slide, I think from the presentation on Monday, is pretty much the same, right? We're not the highest, we're not the lowest, we're in the middle. And again, your perspective of whether, hey, we want to do better, we want to increase by 10%, increase by 15%, all of that I think would be helpful. Again, to place in context, as Don said, where do we anticipate having to spend more money, less money, et cetera? So,
I think that's what we're here to answer. We've got a lot of information to
hopefully
share.
that sets the context for some of the major questions we had.
All right, let me screen share. So in response to the questions about performance, which, as Alexa said, started as regional questions, we did pull an overview of the high school performance, most recent performance. I think too, we want to connect this to a very public piece of information that is just completely erroneous, which is this year's Boston Magazine's rankings of having us at 33. We're going to detail why that's wrong in a minute here and explain it while we give you the data to show that the high school is still very high performing. I'm going to push back a little bit on the questions about we're in the middle of the pack and all, because context and structure matter.
Are you going to be able to get Boston Magazine to?
I'm going to talk on, I'm working on getting them to change it, but it's a red tape nightmare, frankly. So more to come, Kathy. So just to mention that, and then the data all comes out of the formula Boston Magazine uses, which is the DESE published data. And we've learned a lot about where DESE gets their data from, which was eye-opening. Sometimes it comes from us and other times it does not. So we had always assumed it was data we fed them, and it just simply isn't always. So here's the top 10 districts this year, and we fell to 31. I think it's at 33, 31 instead. One metric that is used in the formula is class size, and you can
Sorry,
see.
Lori, where were we in the previous years? When you said we fell, where
That's
were we?
coming in one of the slides, if you don't mind holding on. So the class size is one piece of the metrics that they use. This is accurate. We are up at 19-ish at the high school overall. I am actually not confident in the numbers that are here because if you look at Hingham, they're under 10 in class sizes. That's just completely not logical. We checked the DESI page. They're up at something more in the teens. So the validity of all this is debatable for sure, but the 19 is accurate. We have had a little growth in class size at the high school that we thought was both educationally effective and cost effective. Teacher ratio is another metric that Boston Magazine uses. You can see we are there at 12.3. That is our understanding of where we are at. We're comfortable with where those numbers are, and we think the others are accurate from what we could tell at first glance. Grade 10 MCAS, ELA, 91% of our kids were meeting or exceeding expectations. You can see that's on the upper echelon of the performance scale of the districts under comparison. Math was more in the middle range, and I'm just going to stress this is the middle range of the top 10 districts in the state. I think that's part of what I want to keep saying this afternoon. When we say we're sliding to the middle range, we're not sliding to the middle of the state. We're moving around within the top 10 districts in the state. So let's just frame it as contextual that way. The ones we actually value more than MCAS, which we could have a whole presentation about MCAS, which we're not going to do this afternoon. SATs, which are a nationally normed test and much more standardized than MCAS is. We're performing at very high levels, both in ELA, as you can see there, and in math. So we're really feeling great there. And then the one that I think we're most proud of, partly because we do this while maintaining our core values that everything is not about advanced placement courses and don't even offer them in the humanities of social studies and English. But our kids still take the test in all sorts of areas, include the ones we offer and the ones we don't. And you can see that they are acing them when they take them. And we're really excited by what that looks like and what that says about the rigor of the curriculum. Graduation rate, no surprise to anyone here that we graduate essentially all of our students. Percent to college, this one I'm going to spend a minute on because if you read the text box, Boston Magazine used a number of 72.3% of the kids in the class of 2021 going to college. Everyone in this room knows that can't possibly be true. We did our data dive here to Kathy's question on how do we undo this, because the answer is really 91%. In talking with Boston Magazine, they sent me to DESI. DESI sent me to the Student Data Clearinghouse, which is a national organization that collects data from high schools and colleges. And I'm now working with the Student Data Clearinghouse to see if I can get them to get the accurate number in place. And then I have to make my way back through that chain from Student Clearinghouse to DESI to Boston Magazine. We're 5 months into this. I'll look at Tracy because she's been very engaged. We're 5 months into this effort to correct it and gotten as far as direct engagement with Student Clearinghouse, who now won't upload the new data through the email they gave us, but now we need to do it through a portal we have to be sure we have access to. So everything's slow and
Step in
complicated.
for 1 second. So this has been going on since September 1st, and we have been trying to change it since September 1st. And I think the point is it's not fair to our students or our teachers because they worked hard for this and they should be recognized for that. And over the past 10 years, we've done a lot of looking into Boston Magazine. We have been top 10 until this year. There's 1 year, I think we were 18th. But when you look into what they're looking at, if they don't, for example, in 2020, no one took MCAS, but every single town had MCAS scores in the Boston Magazine. It's completely impossible. So what they do is they go to a prior year, they recalculate it according to how you performed the prior year. So just, I guess my big ask is we are a high performing district. We are high performing K-8. We are high performing at the region. And there's really no place else to go. We are in the top 10. And I think especially K-8, we look at whole child, and it's not just about a test score, but it is about the whole child.
Thanks, Tracy. Another piece of the metrics is Results of educator evaluation, we have a very strong staff, which is reflected here. This is the grid with the overview. I do think it's a few things to highlight off of this, and these are the data points they include. Per pupil spending, and I have such struggle with this with all the equity work we're doing, per pupil spending factors into the ranking. So by default, and I think especially in front of the finance committee, there's a counter purpose there. The more we spend, the higher the ranking could be. I don't think that's the message you want me to take away this afternoon. So rankings always have to come with a grain of salt. There's also a lot of other factors in the rankings, including selling magazines and, that sort of thing. So in closing, we feel really, really comfortable and proud of what our kids are doing. And incorrect data is feeding into some erroneous pieces. And I think we've talked already about context, and we're going to go a lot deeper dive into the contextual elements at K-8, because that is what we're here to talk about. So that is that set of information.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Very,
Yeah.
very,
Last slide is
yes.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, when you see it, when you look at all, from my seat as a school committee member, the metrics that matter, which are student achievement metrics, we're in the top 5 of everything. So to suggest that from a success perspective of our kids who, like Tracy said, have worked so hard for this, and the teachers who support them in their achievement, 31 just seems nuts up. So we just wanted to make sure. We haven't really had the opportunity to put that out in the public in this kind of way. So I thought it was important.
So we'll shift now to K-8, because that is what we're here to talk about. A lot more detail and depth to it, but don't let the data and, incredible amount of information there worry you, because we're going to talk only about the most current. But let me just get my slides going here. So as we look at this, and I'm going to ask you to step way back from me. I haven't talked with the finance committee in a couple of years about where we are in terms of education and the impact of pandemic and all the other work we're doing. So I'm actually excited to get a chance to do that this afternoon. We opened the year by just naming some things to ourselves. And these are the facts. Our kindergartners haven't had any COVID-free years coming into kindergarten. Our 3rd graders haven't had a COVID-free year since kindergarten. 6th grade hasn't had a normal year since 2nd grade. 9th grade hasn't had any normal middle school years. And the high school seniors have only had high school with COVID until this fall. So there's no way that can't factor into how, and the way we're operating, the way kids are functioning, the work that needs to be done for us. And I think that we feel every single day on top of the priorities we had named prior to the pandemic. So we're in the very last days here of a strategic plan that ends this year. You've seen this because this I have shared with you over the last 5 years. We've been working really hard, and I think I want to stress the sentence that's below the initiatives. The goal of the strategic plan is that all students can achieve at these really high levels. We've identified ways that strategies we need to employ for that to happen, programs and methods we need to employ. We need to look at our students' well-being, and I'm going to show you some data that's really troubling in a minute. We need to be sure it's equitable for kids of all backgrounds, kinds, and whatever they bring to the classroom while we're fostering these great, rich, robust learning environments. So a little bit of data, or there's a lot of data here because I think this was an important data overview that we pulled, but right off the press is this.
I'm sorry, Laura, can we just go back to the last slide? Because I like
Sure.
the strategic plan, right? And so I love that concept. Hopefully, and Alexa and I had a conversation. Hopefully we get to a point where it would be very nice and helpful at a snapshot to see where we are in progress relative to these plans. Because that's something I think would be very helpful to see at a glance. Oh, we're 90% there, 95, and here's how we're measuring even where we're there. And at least through the slides on Monday, that was hard for somebody like me to go through the slides and kind of understand and tie all the data you're going to share to the objectives that we have.
And a lot of the data I'm sharing this afternoon does tie. It's the tip of an iceberg, though, of data. There's data attached to all of these, whether it be formative assessments and progress monitoring that we do with the first objective, whether it be the survey work we do extensively with well-being and making sure our kids are well. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that. Inclusive culture, a lot of that's our DEI equity work, which we just completed an equity audit. So we have that data. We're constantly looking at our hiring and number of diverse staff. We're always looking at our number of kids in advanced placements. Like there's a whole treasure trove of information that I'm not going to do this afternoon. So we could certainly be willing to do that as the opportunity allows. There's no question. Right off the press, we just surveyed the community going into the formation of the 23-28 strategic plan. Overwhelmingly, the community is meeting, we're meeting their expectations and exceeding them. This was a pool of 1,800 respondents, so it's a really solid sample set, if not really strong sample set. So we were satisfied with that. We would have loved to hit the 4 mark, but that definitely indicates that the majority of folks are feeling very comfortable and satisfied with what's happening for our children.
So the goal is to get at least a 4.0?
Well, that was my personal goal. It wasn't one I set with anyone else.
Yeah.
We saw some 4s during COVID. I actually think right now, because we're back in the throes of normal operations and we have kids with a range of needs and a range of outcomes, we're in the throes of it. So I was actually really thrilled with a 3.7.
I guess the reason why I'm asking is if the goal is 4, what else do we have to do? Right? Where do we have to put emphasis to get to 4? Because that's a good goal, right? And that's the type of conversation I think
So
that would be
there's-
helpful, right?
And there's so much data that's hard to put all in one presentation. There are also reports from every of the initiatives. People gave us feedback and we can more identify where those are within that survey data. This is just the big broad outcome. We didn't bring all the survey data to you this afternoon.
Dr. Hunter, is that a survey you do every year?
We don't do it every year. We do it at least every other year. We haven't done it since just the emergence from COVID, so it was time. And like I said, there's a lot more data that goes with this. There's a lot of qualitative data as well. We didn't bring all
Directionally,
that.
excuse me, directionally, are we moving up, down, sideways?
We're really solid. Like I said, we hit a 4 during COVID in the throes of the pandemic where kids were hybrid and remote and all of that. I'm really satisfied with the 3.7 because as you can see, that shows that more than 90% of our constituents are satisfied or better. So we're doing a lot right. And I think we just want to name that and that this community is really very pleased and comfortable with what the schools are doing. So this is going to feel a little eclectic, but that's because that's what's leading to the budget we're bringing. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about an incredibly important variable that's just come to our plates that is about to imminently have impact. There's an emergency homeless shelter. I know this is not new news probably, going into the Best Western. The doors are going to open March 1st. We are expecting students to start staying for multiple months at a time as soon as that first week. It's unclear. They're not going to be able to tell us. We're going to have to be able to respond in a really quick fashion. I've been on calls with DESE and they were very clear that students that are in the hotel for 5 days or more need school enrollment. So 5 days, 5 days. Students, mostly the demographic they're giving us, which I expect is somewhat variable, most 2/3 of the kids that they're placing, they are naming as coming from within the state of Massachusetts. That means through McKinney-Vento, which is the federal homeless legislation, they have a right to go to their school of origin. They are placing kids within Middlesex County so that it's a doable drive to get them back to their home schools. What that means is they're not going to go to the Concord schools. We're going to need to cost share transportation with their home district at a cost of 50% per child. And I'm going to just say out loud right now, the private vendors that have any drivers available, because there's an incredible challenge of transport, are charging $500 a day. So we're concerned by this, knowing that it's the obligation we have. There will be some state reimbursement in the year to follow, sort of like circuit breaker works of maybe 15%. In a minute, I'm going to talk on the work that's going on at the legislative level, hoping to offset some of that. However, if the students want to attend the Concord Public Schools, it will be a family's choice if they have a school of origin. If they don't, they're all going to attend the Concord Public Schools. And just to name the services we know that they're going to need, and I've confirmed this with other districts that have homeless shelters: trauma support, English language learner needs, academic needs, basic needs, the gamut of just the continuum of all kinds of services. DESE has a grant up right now because of the homeless crisis in Massachusetts. There's a DESE grant of $1,000 per student, minimal. The new governor has proposed a healthy package of much more funding that is in the legislators' hands just recently, and hopefully is going to move forward to help to offset some of these costs that certainly other districts are going to incur just as we face.
So where you said a minimum grant of 1,000, is there a range, or how does that work?
Right now, they're saying we can apply for 1,000 per child.
Yep.
It doesn't have a cap per se, but 1,000 per child is going to be very minimal, given the
So
potential.
that's their floor, and the expectation of more later, or?
There is definite hopes. The governor is working really hard to push through this new piece of legislation, which has millions of dollars attached to it for exactly this purpose, some to the shelter systems itself, and some very much earmarked for the schools and the needs that we're going to have to support.
Have they given you any indication as to the numbers of children?
Nope, they have 105 rooms at the Best Western. They have not said they won't fill them all. They haven't said they will. What we are very much hearing is that there are thousands of families in the pipeline waiting for housing right now. So they certainly can fill them. There are people in need. Will they fill them all? I think is not certain. Some of the rooms are going to be short stay, they're telling us, which would just be a quick stopover. So there may be some rooms that wouldn't require any support from us. The other thing the state is trying to do to help offset some of the needs that would hit here is to place young families that might not have school-age children. So we'll see if that holds, given the variables that are certainly at play here.
Can I ask a quick question that I haven't asked before? The 105 rooms, those could have multiple humans in them. This is not about a one-to-one.
No, they place whole families in them.
Yeah, and so do they have like a limit on how many people?
I don't know the answer to that, but I know a family of 4 would easily be placed in one room. Yeah, beyond that, we'd hope they get a second room, but.
Dr. Hunter, will you be carrying this as a separate and brand new line item in your budget?
No, there's no way to do that. It's embedded. It has to be through the services we provide. So special education will have to absorb those IEPs. ELL will have to absorb those needs. Class size will have to absorb whatever students arrive. We can try on a tickler off to the side to see if we can segregate it out, but there isn't a way to just say it's cost for the homeless.
I mean,
students.
how will we know what it's costing us, and how will we know when it goes away that we haven't attracted those costs and kept them inadvertently forever, even if that shelter is no longer part of the state program?
I think there'll be some things that are really easy to track. English language learners will be able to track if we had to add new staff members. Normally, we have a small core group of staff members, and that's more than sufficient. The question is, will that balloon on us here? Some of the most significant special ed needs, we can certainly track those costs. We can certainly track where homeless population tripped us to need a new classroom, those sort of things. But we're gonna have to do it by category, I think.
Okay, so I would like to request that you do keep a sidebar calculation of those costs, because at some point those may go away. And I don't want them to be permanently embedded in the budget, and,
They're not in the budget.
No, our zero-based
Well,
process would
well-
always bring us back to, the needs we have at the moment. So what we know right now is the hotel is being leased by the state till June of 2024. So that's the budget we're talking about, plus whatever we got to do this year. Certainly, we'll talk more in coming years if that were to be something they maintain, but we can do our best to track it off.
so,
Will we be tracking the number of kids though?
Certainly, we'll be tracking the number of kids. Yeah.
so
Did they give you
Yeah.
any indication of when you would know the number of folks coming?
No, the word of wisdom I got last week, Chris, was be ready for it. You will have no time to prepare as starting March 1st.
And it may, and from what I understand, I've been following it. It'll go up and down. I mean, you may
Mhm.
have, you know,
Mhm.
some kids come in and then they leave and some other kids come in. So you don't know, you know, it's not as clear cut, but I certainly, you know, maybe they can fit into classrooms without adding staff, you know, for a temporary placement and whatnot. So I know it's an issue. I hope it isn't a budget issue in the sense that we should be able to accommodate, you know, students as they come up and down and not,
The one I'm losing the most sleep over is transportation to the school of origin,
Sure.
because
Okay.
if we get 20
Gotcha.
kids, we've got to transfer to other communities.
Okay.
That could be budget busting pretty quickly.
Okay. Gotcha.
But that will track for you for sure.
understood. Thank you.
But anyway, so that's one big variable that's actually brand new and only a couple of weeks after we built the budget. So. All right, shift gears, okay?
Dee, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Dee, you need to use the microphone.
Would you just repeat your last comment about the cost associated with the
Sure,
transportation?
sure. So if a student who lives in a Massachusetts community becomes homeless, wherever they become housed, so we would be the housing district, their school of origin, so let's say it's,
That's all.
yeah, sure. If they want to go back to their school they've been in,
Right,
they have a
They
right
can't
to
do that.
say that.
okay.
Transportation would be coordinated with us and their prior district. Someone would run point, and then we would split the costs, half the cost.
Okay, so we would be out of pocket half of the costs up front. But I think I heard you say earlier in the conversation that the state is reimbursing
There's
that.
a little, there's what, 15%?
About 15%.
They will reimburse
following year.
in the following year 15% of those costs. And do we have a campaign to get 100%?
Well, we're hoping the governor's legislation is including much more of a subsidy to the transportation issues associated with these shelters. So the governor's putting forth a big package right now to try to offset these costs. I am quite confident transportation is in that package.
So I understand that this is an issue between now and the end of this year, but as we're talking about the subsequent, our discussion is about next year's budget, correct?
State has rented the hotel through June of 2024.
Okay, so since there are so many unknowns associated with this, should we be focusing on that at this discussion, during this discussion, or should we go back to our regular discussion on the budget for next
Yeah,
year?
we are going back. It's just a really important piece of unpredictability that I think the room needs to be clear on.
And I think everybody is.
I think you all are. So I'm ready to go on.
Yeah, okay.
And I think most, I hope, members of our community will welcome
Yes,
homeless,
we are actually
needy
looking for it.
people into our town.
Thank you, Peggy. I agree with you.
Thank you.
So back to the context of the world we're in here as we built this budget. We were naming a mental health crisis prior to the pandemic. We are naming an aggregate mental health crisis since the pandemic. And I'm just going to highlight those two numbers that the red arrows are stressing. All of this data is concerning for the most part. But in grade 6, 8 in the high schools, all the kids are aggregated. You can see our trends. This is a youth risk behavior survey that we take every 2 years. You can see the trends in grade 6 and 8 especially are growing in concern, and the high school's holding steady at a high level of concern. Self-identifying, the students take the survey, feeling depressed for 2 weeks or more. In grade 6, we have 20%, grade 8, 24, and grade 9 through 12, 27. A quarter of our kids are considering themselves depressed. Even more concerning, considered or thought about injuring or hurting themselves on purpose in the past 12 months. We are running between 24, 21, and 20%. Those are unacceptable numbers and must be the priority of everyone. So that is driving, happy to talk academics and performance, but unless we address this, the kids aren't available to us.
Can you describe currently how you're addressing this?
Yeah, sure. And you could be a whole hour presentation on itself. We are working really hard to look at both our broad-based social emotional curriculums and programming that all students are exposed to. We're updating our K-5 program, home-based advisory at the middle school, and we just put through a brand new high school schedule that's going to give us more options to do more directed social emotional work with guidance counselors to all kids. So that's the aggregate level work, is literally teaching social emotional skills, coping strategies, self-awareness, all of it, trying to, in many ways, just norm the fact that this is an issue for all of us. At the higher levels of tier 2 and tier 3, which are as the kids become more acutely in need, we have broadened and looked at how our counseling and support services are available. The kids are all taking annual survey that's more formative in nature, so that we can self-identify kids in need, both at the middle and high school, so that they flag and we immediately loop them to a counselor and work with them on whatever their needs are, and we're identified in the survey. At the highest level, the most acute level, we have more. These are the most challenging. These are the kids that are actually acutely in crisis, suicidal or close to, and in and out of hospitals. And those are where we have built special education programs, some of the continuum you've heard about, and some regular education programs too at the high school that can support those students without them having to go on an IEP. But those are intense, highly adult one-to-one ratios with students of some of our best mental health professionals. There are districts, we are not quite to this point yet, but we certainly started to peruse what's out there. There are districts bringing clinical therapists into the school day. We're still working through what we're doing and how we're operating. And if we're going to be to that point, there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Have you been able to quantify the costs associated with the actions that you're taking?
Yes, and yes, with a big, asterisk next to it, to bring in a whole entire program of K-5 and update that. We just received a $60,000 grant from Concord Ed Fund to bring those materials and trainings in, so we didn't have to bring those costs to you. There are high price tags, obviously personnel, expertise in personnel. They certainly got some attachments to it. You can, as we talk, we could try to reference where we reworked portions of the METCO grant. So we had a new counselor there and just tried to build out our capacity.
It's extremely important, and this is a necessary cost. And I'm not trying to tamp it down. What I'm trying to do is to better understand how do we manage this cost going forward.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think we're looking to do it both with a balanced approach to personnel and trying to not just bring you FTE requests year after year. There is no new counselor request in this budget, but then to also look at alternative sources. We felt an urgency to do the K-5 piece without trying to initially we thought we were going to piecemeal the process in and be able to do it within the budget. And the urgency this fall made it very clear that wasn't the case. And we approached CEF, and just 2 weeks ago, they awarded us the $60,000 to do all of K-5 at once.
So there's no direct staff to address mental health at CPS?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say it
Because I
that
thought I heard you say,
There's no additional requests.
how many staff do we have that are mental health counselors?
Right. And I'm going to do these off the top of my head. We have 2 school psychologists at the middle school.
Full-time, right?
Full-time. We have 5 guidance counselors at the middle school. That might be off 1 or 2. We're always looking at what their role is and how they're servicing. The elementary schools have 1 guidance, just 1 counselor. The specific SEL programs that we built, the special ed ones, those all have a counselor attached specifically for our most acute needs. So there's 1 at the middle school attached to the program. There's 1 at Alcott attached to that program.
So when you very quickly breezed over something that sounded like a grant. And every time I hear the word grant, I think what happens when the grant goes away?
Yep,
And
so
how
Concord
do we
Ed Fund
get
is.
that out of the budget when the grant goes away?
Yep, so they're doing all the onboarding of this program, the recurring, there's no recurring costs that are going to be fallout of that. The onboarding of training and the onboarding of purchasing of materials. So essentially one-time costs.
They're training teachers.
They're training
So
teachers.
eventually, as new teachers come in,
Yeah,
we
they'll
need
be
to do it again.
kids in there, but that's always the case. We had a previous SEL program that we always had to be sure we
But I just
updated
want to
new
be clear
people.
that that is anticipated cost, whether it's 3, 5, 7.
Yeah, the budget's built to absorb that though, just because we've always had to do that. We had to do that with Open Circle, which was our previous program. We've now replaced the program and we'll just do the same. Built into the professional
Who
development budget.
does that, I guess? That's the question.
We work with the provider of the program, in this case, responsive classroom trainers. Usually districts work together to onboard new staff as they get hired. We're obviously doing district-wide right now, but we'll share costs with some of the local districts and then send.
We had
people.
one-time training before through a grant, and you're saying now for that one, don't
You
have.
just do the materials. Let me clarify, so I gotta slow down a little bit. So I thought you were asking about teachers as we hired after the one-time onboarding is
Exactly,
done.
yep.
So 3 years from now, when somebody gets hired and needs to get trained, we will collaborate with other local districts who use the same program. We'll cost share for a few teachers each. And that we build in, we already have that
So
money
it
in
gets
the
built
budget.
into the base of the budget
Already
is what I'm
built
hearing.
in.
So, because I thought I heard there's no further cost, but there is a slight cost that gets built in.
But it's a cost that we've always had. When we had Open Circle as a program, we had to train those teachers. That money is already in the PD budget
Agreed. And then when you have this, that gets built in on top, or would you close off?
instead of.
Instead of, thank you. That's a clear, okay, that's what I was,
There, we got there.
because otherwise I wasn't sure whether it was incremental or not. Thank you.
All right.
Great, thank you.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on NCAS. We talked quite a bit about that. I will just name on math because it's important to us to name it. We had a major technology issue at the middle school on the second day of the test. So we're really not sure the results are valid. Kids were rushing through because they were getting booted off. I actually called it at 11:30 that morning. It was so not effective the way they were trying to take the test. So more to come on all that, but special education,
Can I
I
just go back to,
Sure.
so this is an example where I think it'd be helpful to have an understanding of what we're striving to do, right? And
Mhm.
I forget what the scale is, whether, is it 80 the maximum or 100? I don't know. But I guess I'm kind of curious, what do we strive to do? If you just take ELA at 67, do we strive to be at 75, 77, 90? I'm curious, what are we striving to? And then how do we measure ourselves and what programs do we put in place to ensure that happens?
Yeah, and I think those expectations have shifted as COVID has hit and then come through. So everyone's down a little bit. As you can see, the top scores here are up at the 80% mark. It wouldn't be unheard of that we would hope to get to that or even a little bit above. I will say we're looking at math and naming curriculum changes we need to look at that we had prioritized, everybody prioritized certain standards and now are bringing back all of them and we need to balance that. So the one other thing I'll just name at the K-8 level, you have a lot of kids who are being identified in their needs. And so that can be a really big variable, especially as needs are identified but not being serviced yet. So there's a whole diagnostic piece that evolves K-8, and you're going to say all the districts are having that same experience. We're looking at how we're best serving kids from all facets. And we know the academics will come as we service the other needs that are provisioned. So the short answer.
So we don't have an expectation.
We don't set, not on
Simply, we can simply say we don't have an expectation that we've set.
Not on
that's fine.
MCAS. We
Okay.
have other data tools that we actually value more and are formative, and we do set goals for ourselves
Fair
there.
enough.
I'm looking at this chart and wondering if it's apples to apples, because we have on the math side, well, on both sides, some are just K-8 and some are K-12.
Correct. Thank you.
And
Peggy.
AB is K-12.
Yep.
So where's the K-8 there? I mean, it's not apples to apples.
It's not apples to apples, and I'll say that, between the regional or not regional, the size of the schools are very different.
Yep.
Carlisle's got 600 kids, we have 2,200. So there's a lot of variables there.
Okay, thank you.
No, thanks for that point. Special education, and we're going to there's a lot of data here, so you can slow us down as you would ask me to slow down. One piece of data on this chart is 10-year history of out-of-district placements. You know that's a significant intent that we've had to keep kids in district, and we've talked a lot about that. You can see the historic data of the number of kids out and where we are today at 45. And then in terms of disabilities by category, we thought this would.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
You started that in 19, is that correct? When we
Yes.
started insourcing?
Yes. We're going to show you more details of the intensive programs in a minute, because I know those are always of interest to you.
So this is another one. Is our desire to get that to 0 or 10?
We'll never get to
or-
0.
Well, I understand that, but still I'm just curious, do we have some expectation of what would we like it to get to?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer in terms of CPS, because that's the budget we're talking about. My personal goal and belief from the minute we started all this, because I've been in other districts of similar size and demographic, was 15 was a really solid number for CPS, and getting below that was really not realistic. We are sitting at 16 right now. I think you are at the place where students with certain profiles will be able to stay in district. The ones that will go out are either very, very significant needs or very individual needs that we don't have programming for. So to me, at CPS, we've come pretty close to the goal that I had thought we would aim for. I don't think you're going to see that drop much from here.
So do you feel that your approach and the support people that you have and the teachers you have is what you're going to keep and what you're going to maintain?
Yes. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, about what those services are. We gave you an overview of the kinds of disabilities by category of our students, just informationally. We thought you'd find that interesting. I've been asked a lot whether our percentage of population is changing and compared to the state. This year, you'll see this is actually this year's data. 18% of our students in the CPS schools are noted with disabilities versus 19.4 at the state level. So when you ask them, are we reaching some of our goals? One of the threads of the strategic plan is we build more regular education services so kids don't have to go on IEPs. There's a data point showing that it's working. I had also been asked about families moving into the district and what the percentage of special education students was there. You can see it's about 10% the last 2 years.
Sorry, the disabilities category 9 through 12 are just Concord residents, or is that Concord and
Which one are you looking at, just so I answer?
the table on the right hand?
Yeah, no, that's all of the high
That's
school.
all high school. Okay. And where it says Concord down below, is that just?
That is just CPS.
Thanks.
So is it positive then, if I look at the bottom numbers there where it says 9 and 11% versus the 18, is that what I'm comparing it to? So 9.
No,
and
they're
11,
two separate data points.
Okay.
The 18 is the aggregate overall CPS percentage. I guess it was at the school committee, we had been asked if the families moving into town, new to the district, third graders enrolling, what percentage of the kids moving in were on IEPs? You can see it's about 10%.
Okay.
And then more depth on the programs that I thought you would find interesting, and certainly the school committee did. The number of students we have in our program since their inception, 2020 and beyond, and what that number looks like, along with the correlating FTE, which is obviously a big part of the budget driver. I'll skip to the totals there. You can see we've got threads of programs K through 5 and up through the middle school now, which is exactly what the goal was. And we're now servicing 80 students in our K through 5 intensive programs, teachers of 11. You can see that's increased over the years because we were building out. Counselors have stayed at 2, 1 per social emotional program. And our total assistance, which can be one of the drivers for sure, is now at 32. Some of the most intensive programs, especially at the younger grades, might require one-to-one service for students.
Are they full-time or are they specialists or?
The assistants are generally full-time and will stay with a child all day. It's important to note when a student goes out of district, most out of district tuitions don't include a one-to-one assistant. You would pay that on top of the tuition. So no matter how you service a child who needs that level of support, it's going to have that cost associated. I'll just, share a little pride. We're so excited by what this has done for the students and families with special needs, that they can stay in district and get services here. And I can't understate the impact on the general population to have those kids with them and sharing with them and participating with them. It's just been such a value add.
And if I could, my take from your, the enrollments, 9%, 11%, and then some of the other numbers, it doesn't, I know, sadly, one of the comments that people move here, we're a draw for sped kids. And it looks like we're at an equilibrium or close to it, where we're not, going up by some substantial number on new sped enrollments. Now, there's always some surprises.
Yeah.
Some, more serious cases, for example, that might come into town, but what's your?
So I think to many degrees, I totally agree with you that we're not getting inundated with families coming here just for sped. Do we get a handful? Sure. But then when I look at the enrollments in the in-district programs, which I think we're staying level on the aggregate of special ed, which if you look at 565 kids pre-K to secondary, or just focus on the K-8 if you'd like, those we're doing well at with the percentages not increasing. When you look at the number of kids requiring the intensive supports, which is what this slide shows, 80 of them, which we were prior servicing 23 in 2020, and the rest were going out of district. And the rest, there's that third group, we're floating among all of our other programming, not fully getting what they needed or not having been identified, or we've had others that we were clearly needing to identify. So I think part of the struggle we're having is the level of need in these intensive categories, if that makes sense. That feels like it's growing. The data shows it's growing.
It's a 350% increase in 3 years. It's a lot.
So what impact will that have on the number of teachers or assistants?
Yep. So you can see right now we're at 11.4 and 32 assistants. We need one more teacher in the FTE ask for FY24. And I'll tell you, it's because we have 2 middle schools, folks. Otherwise, we'd be able to put them all together and do one teacher. So hopefully that's a short-term issue. And then in terms of assistance, that one we try to programmatically plan for. And my hope is that we're not going to need too many more. But if any students need individualized, that may vary that a little bit as we go. So that one's a little harder to be sure of.
Do you have any new outplacement students? And I mean, ones that with needs that have to be.
We have placed 1, maybe 2 students out of district in CPS this year. We've been very adeptly able to maintain kids with very, very acute needs in our in-house programming. So very few are being placed out.
Thank you.
This exercise was just to demonstrate how the circuit breaker formula applies and how the cost differential can look. This is one program that we did this with from data from last year's enrollment in the program and last year's circuit breaker information. So you'll see with a elementary intensive program that across all of it houses 18 students. We're able, if we had sent them all out of district, which would have happened 5 years ago, we'd be spending about 1.8 million inclusive of transportation. In district cost, which we used based on our FTE formulas and tried to break it all out as best we could, about $1 million. So the savings there significant at 760,000, and that's annually. Obviously, different programs have different ways this would come together. You'd have to do everyone one at a time to actually see the savings because different needs have different costs associated.
Dr. Hunter, just to go back to that page before, just one question. So
Sure.
the growth of the students with acute needs from 37 to 80, do you know what that number is going to be in 2024?
I don't expect it's going to jump. Most of the growth there is because we brought the intensive middle school programs online.
Okay.
So students who had been getting piecemeal services were able to then become programmatic students.
Okay.
I think it's going to stay fairly flat.
Okay.
With my crystal ball.
Do do anything that aggregates the costs associated with those students? Is there any sort of number that says on average it's going to cost X dollars?
So the best we
In
can
district, you know, what it would.
in district, the best we can do is to look at the number of kids with the number of staff and do sort of that basic appropriation. We took it another layer deep here as we mapped it against the potential of out of districts, but usually it's the staff versus the number of kids.
Do you have a number for that or?
It varies in every program, so we'd have to pick one and
Oh, I
give you
see.
an example. This slide, I think, starts to get to what you're asking, where if the kid, you know, the out of district tuitions are a certain amount, we could go back to the chart and look at how many teachers are in this room and divide it by the number of kids. It's certainly less.
No.
What's the state reimbursement for special needs?
Right now, circuit breakers at 75%.
75%.
75%. And how is that determined?
The state decides that in their budget process. In a down economy, that can change to less than 75%. We're not.
We're not in
the
a
state
down
has, you
economy
know,
at the
it's
moment.
fairly flush, so.
What, okay, so what we pay and then what's the amount that they pay 75%? Are we paying 25%?
So if you look at, it's a complicated formula. This chart tries to capture it. So circuit breaker applies to out of district tuitions that are 4 times the foundation budget or higher.
What's your
So the-
your foundation?
What's this year's
It's a state-
foundation?
It's a state foundation.
Yeah.
It's 13,142. That's last year.
That's last year's.
14142 times 4 is what we
Rounded to
pay?
52. Yeah.
So
Okay.
say 52,000.
Okay, 52.
So they will pay 75% of any of the differential between 52,000 and the actual tuition.
So why aren't we asking for 100%?
There's certainly some lobbying going on to try to
Is there?
continue it. Oh, absolutely. So the Superintendent's Association has identified our goal, our political goals this year as all special education related. Increase of circuit breaker, the way they came out, it is not only the 75%, but 2 times the foundation budget instead of 4. They're also very aggressively coming after the 14% increase that has been allowed to the private settings. We didn't even talk about that yet. Because
That once before.
yeah, so a portion of our increase this year to out of district tuitions is that the state has allowed all the private settings to increase by 14% this year, and it just gets passed along to the districts. Circuit breaker will apply, and eventually you'll get some of that back in subsidy, but the front loading of that is really, really hard. So there's definitely some political work going on to try to make sure that gets addressed.
So how can, I don't know, the FinCom help on this, or how can the town help on this?
I might have mentioned it to Representatives Cataldo and Gentile, and I would encourage you to do the same. So-
Yeah, the Mass Municipal Association might be doing something. You could check.
MASC is we were supposed to sign.
Yeah.
a letter,
Yeah, MASC is doing similar.
Send to our representatives in the state senate.
They're working on it.
Yeah.
So what we need to do individually or collectively is go hit the people who have to vote on it, right? So
Someone has to propose the bill first. I think I know there's some legislators being tagged for that. And then once it gets in the mix, we need the legislators to attend to it. Yeah,
well, if we can help.
by all means.
Yeah.
We'll just send you up there, Dee. We thought I'd give you some background on the.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sure, sure.
This is a sample. Was this last year fiscal actuals from fiscal year 2022?
Yes.
Thank you.
Carryover, which is circuit breaker carryover, and I'll remind you of the short version of how circuit breaker works. We get the subsidy a year later based on the kids we claim the current school year. The goal, best practice is always to carry over a year's worth of circuit breaker. That number can change depending how many kids are out of district and what reimbursement you're getting. It seemed important that we show you, this is what we've been carrying over, not what we've been receiving. We'll show you that in a minute. This is what we've been carrying over in history. And part of why I wanted to go back as far as we did is because there's been a lot of work intentionally done to stabilize the circuit breaker carryover. And you're going to hear us mention that we've been dipping into it a lot more. So I just wanted to note, we've been working really hard to bring circuit breaker back as a reserve fund at its hopefully maximum amounts. And we're definitely starting to use it instead of doing that. So
Is there a cap on how much can be in the balance each year?
1 year's revenue.
What, so the
Prior-
prior year's
year,
revenue?
Yeah, well, current year revenue at the end of this year, you can carry over. Yes. Same thing. I think.
So for fiscal year 24, so the end of fiscal 23, coming up in a few months, what's the cap that the maximum it can be?
I believe it's 975,000.
So we're not even close to hitting that
No,
this year. 'cause
plus
it
or
looks-
minus a few thousand, but
But it
975.
looks like we're going to end up around 550.
Mhm.
Okay, and then I think you're proposing 100 of that to, okay.
Yeah. Just one, I found this on the DESI page and I thought it was great. I thought you'd all love it and want to study it at home. So this is DESI's version of our history at CPS with special education funding. It's inclusive of everything, but it breaks it out so you can see the patterns and the trends. You can see the out of district changes, which was really validating to see. I won't go through all of it. You can see the percentage increases as total expenditures happen year to year. One data point we didn't have that this did provide is percentage of total budget that special ed is being allocated to. And we were right in the middle of the state on this one. There were districts up at almost 30% of their budget as time has gone on and sped needs have increased being allocated to that. There were some districts who are somehow struggling to make, 15 and 20% of their budgets work for sped. We're staying right in the middle of the state at about 25%. I found it validating that we're maintaining the 25% given the increased needs and all the programs we've brought online. One other random note I didn't have any place else to put that is related to our previous history here on spending. In 22 and 23, part of what got us to guideline was these offsets by returning students from out of district. You heard me say we're at 16 kids. I don't think we're going under 15. They're here. They're not out. So the hundreds of thousands we've saved is no longer an offset because we're stable at CPS. We're just saving by not sending them. We're not actually dollar for dollar going to pull kids back and save anymore.
We already shoveled that walk.
Yeah, we used that up, Peggy, right? For really good reasons, we used it. A data point that we wanted to mention and do the comps on, a number of the coming slides are back looking at districts around us, and to some of the points we've made, apples to apples is always a little bit of a hard piece, but this is the DESI data as they present it. We're at 18 average class size in the CPS schools. That's by design. We feel like that's about where we want to be, and that's what we're aiming to maintain at both K-5 and CPS. Student-teacher ratio is another way to look at the number of adults versus the number of kids. You can see we're in the middle of this list for that as well. I'm not going to spend more time on it. It's the same type of data. Enrollment, I think, is worth a few minutes on because we've named this. We have some decline over the last few years, predicted and anticipated, and frankly, in some cases at the middle school, we were anxious for it. So you can see where we are overall at 1946. You've got the current breakout across the 3 elementary schools and the middle school. We're always maintaining those balances as best we can. And what I want to then highlight, I'm going to skip one slide to the projections before we talk adults. These are brand new NESDEC projections that we just received. They certainly reflect the enrollment decline, moderate decline. We're not in any grave decline here. It's a moderate decline. However, you can see they start to swing it back up in the 5-year time range or so. So we're going to want to keep looking at enrollments, and we stay very close to the census numbers. We stay very close to these projections. We stay very close to the housing starts. Every variable we possibly can, we try to continue to monitor. But you can see by 2032, the middle school's back at almost 700 kids, and we've rebounded to 2017 in terms of total K-8 students. So interesting set of data to just receive. In terms of professional staff, what I was hoping you'd see is that the FTEs have some connection to whether we're talking special ed or the enrollment shifts, because we build this staffing plan just as zero-based as we do everything else. So one example is Alcott's FTEs have actually gone down in the last 5 years. The middle school, you can see a bump up in 2020 when we purposely built out the teams and made clean teams so that the vision of the staffing we needed for the new school would start to form at that point. You can see at Thoreau, we're up, and that's because of the level of intense programming there in special education. So it was another data point that at a high level, you could see the patterns and trend and spot where things had happened with intent either up or down based on what our needs were. Per pupil spending, we definitely all reference this fairly regularly. This is comparable to the other districts around us. You can see we're at the 23,000-ish mark here. This is 2021 data. That's the most recent on the DESI web page. So given that, we're working hard to not be top all the time and moderating where we can to make it cost effective for high quality, which then I'm going to name average teacher salary because of the veteran nature of the staff and our salary schedule. This one we definitely hit at the top. These are 2020 data points, which I wish were newer. But that means that, you know, to maintain a staff of this experience and veteran nature and salary scale, we're working really hard to offset some of those salary implications to bring you this per pupil spending. And I just wanted to frame it that way, that while teachers here certainly are compensated healthily, we are still bringing you, pretty reasonable per pupil spendings and increases through the work we're doing through the zero-based.
And just to be clear, this is for a nine-month year. This is not prorated backwards
This is a teacher's annual salary
for all year.
all year. Yeah.
And they work for 9 months,
School year is 10 full months.
10 full months. Okay. Just checking.
Well, since we're paused, Dr. Ender, you flagged that the enrollment is going to increase, and it looks, if you could go back to that slide of 32, yeah.
That one?
That shows a 19% jump in 1 year between 3031 and 3032, and it's the only counter trend year. Do you have an explanation?
We don't. We can loop back with NASDAQ and figure what their thinking is there.
I only
Sure.
mention it because you said that it's heading back up, but the
Yep.
trend is down, right?
The trend is down.
Okay.
Yep.
So it'd be the year before that, it's 581.
Yep.
That's for
So-
the middle school, which has a capacity for 700.
Correct, which we knew might be 600, 650, and 700 would be the max. So hopefully we're not going to
So
see these change a lot.
somewhere there's a projected 19% increase in 1 year.
We'll double check with them to see where that came from.
Couple of questions on
It'd be the
the,
baby bloom.
They had it by grade on there too.
Yeah, we'll get an answer. I don't think we want to go too deep right now.
a couple of questions on the data,
Sure,
just to make sure I have it, I understand it. So in the per pupil spending, what's the source of it, Desi? So in Concord, where the CPS benefits and so forth are in the town budget, how do they adjust for that? Do other schools have that?
We have to report that in our
Yeah.
end of year report. So we
Okay.
get that information and include it in our data.
Okay, so you think this includes your benefits or it's without?
It does. It's supposed to, otherwise our audit wouldn't pass. So
Okay,
yeah, they
so
are-
it
these are-
includes the benefits number that are carried by the
Yeah,
town.
For
Yes.
most districts, the benefits are carried by the town, so they
Yeah.
definitely collect.
They have to make an
How do
adjustment.
we get the benefits from the town if everything is
Just the number.
town? What do you mean just the number?
So we would ask Gail what number she is reporting out at the end of the year for costs associated with benefits for the CPS staff and report that on our end of year report.
Okay, so that is available.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
a section of the report for municipal paid costs. that we're
I see.
required to complete and work with the town on.
Oh, and, okay, that's interesting.
I have one more and then I'll be on the student teacher ratio page. Where do tutors and associates, how do they fall into this list?
Yeah, so they actually are part of this page, but they're not part of class size. That's actually the difference between the class size slide and the student ratio,
They're
or
in
teacher-student
here.
ratio.
They're in the tutors and so forth.
Yeah, that's why the number drops so much lower.
Yeah, okay, okay, thank you.
So this slide and the previous slide, I think are another one where I would simply ask, what do we think should be the right sizes and what do we think the right ratio should be?
So my goal is
Higher,
18.
lower?
No, we're right where I want to be with K-8 class size.
So class size, we think the appropriate is 18, so that's good.
Yep.
And then similarly, just in terms of the student teacher ratio,
Yeah, this one's a little trickier because it combines all the staff across all of the schools and then just divides without factoring in the programming that's there. So it's a little harder to say a goal because depending on the setting, you have different goals. Special ed classrooms versus,
because the range hopefully is.
that'd be a very big range. Our most intensive sped programs would have.
But taking all of that into consideration, generally speaking, within a given year, because students are going to be moving maybe from one
Sure.
program to the next, is there a rough range that you would say anywhere from 9 to 12 or 10 to 14?
Yeah, I think I'd want to work on that one and get back to you and not do it off the top of my head.
A different question.
Sure.
On the student-teacher ratio, how many teachers do you have in a classroom? You wanted to get to 18. So how many teachers are in a classroom at any one time?
Depending on the student population that's in the room. So a regular education general classroom has one teacher and the students by themselves, that can happen. There might be a co-teacher for special ed there part of the day, or the special educator might pull the kids out and service them outside of the classroom. There might be tutors and assistants in the room, all depending on the needs of the kids.
So when I'm looking at these averages, it's because at some time, there's another person in the room with,
For the student teacher ratio, yes, that's why that's low.
okay.
Lower.
So on average, is it generally 1.5 people or 2 people or 1 3/4 person or?
I wouldn't want to guess. It really depends on the needs of the kids. So some classrooms have multiple people and others don't. We'd have to pull the data and
Okay, but in
Aggregate
any
it.
particular class, there's like a teacher, the students are focused on a teacher.
Correct.
There might be these others assistants.
yes, so there's always one general education teacher in a K-5 classroom and a 6-8 classroom. And then the other stuff is all about supports to the kids and their needs.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have any dogs in the classrooms too?
We do bring therapy dogs in fairly often, yes.
What about grandparents?
Are they in all?
They come visit. They don't stay for the whole day.
They don't stay for the whole day. Are they in all of the schools?
We have therapy dogs in every school to some extent, yes.
Oh, well,
All right.
cats?
No.
No?
Third of therapy cats, Peggy. I
I'm
don't
not
know.
good at helping.
I think the last page you were on was the
I
average.
still have one more. I'm sorry. I'm going to.
Sure, Chris.
Okay,
Sorry.
All right.
Because I think it answers a question I had earlier. On that special education fiscal spending page, if I looked at column K, which has the totals there,
Yeah.
it's a bit dated. It only goes up to 21. But if I
Yes.
went back to the page where you have the chart with the students that are in the program, is this just the middle school or is this everything on the total fiscal
It's
spending?
all of CPS.
It's CPS without the high school, just CPS.
Yeah.
And if I go to this page for 21, what number do I pick up for students? The 51?
Which page are you on, Chris?
It's a special education page.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Is that what I would pick up for 21? I divide 11.7 million by 51 students?
So ask me
Sound
again
right
that
to me.
question.
I'm sorry. If I go to the page that says total special education expenditures, which is 11.7 million for 2021, I think that's CPS, and I'm not quite positive.
It is, yep.
Okay, and then if I went to 21 on this chart, there are for CPS 23 students. Is that the number?
It should be if you're in the column that's out of district placements.
Yes.
Yes.
So I would take the 11, almost 12 million.
Yeah, that should map together. Yep.
But that's only the out-of-district students.
Right.
That's not the in-district students.
Not the, how, are
Which
those
is-
somewhere else or?
Well, we didn't give you it would be a chart like the one here, but a year old. It's
Okay, that's what I was trying to use it
Isn't
for.
it the 16 plus the 80? Isn't that right? It's 96. One's out of district and the other one's in district?
No, that whole page is in district.
Yeah, that's all in districts.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, it's right at the top.
Okay, sorry, thanks.
Okay, so let's just, I think we're close to done
We're
here.
on
The
the
sal-
average.
I'm sorry, the salary piece is pure salary, not counting benefits.
Correct.
Okay.
Bob can jump in since he was the one who was able to put this together for us. So this is the 5-year trends, both total spend, the grants, the offsets, and then the overall. I think in a minute, we're going to answer more of the grant questions and the one-time funds. Can you just name what you've got in that grant revolving line so that we're all clear what led to those numbers?
Sure. So within the grant revolving, the ESSER funds are there, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, those will be going away. There's a little potential remnant in FY25, but by the end of FY24, they'll be substantially spent down. Special ed ARPA funds, which came out around the same time as ESSER 2, are also included in grant revolving. So those are ones that are, again, will be going away and are primarily being used in 23 and 24. The bulk of the grant and revolving funds that are kind of ongoing are circuit breaker funds, IDA special ed funds. They also include food service revolving funds, which are just passed through. They're not providing budget relief. They're just supporting the food service program. So we can kind of ignore those, but they're in the numbers and they're in the gross spend. So those are the items in the grants revolving. You'll see in 24, we show a little bit of a decline and it'll decline further into FY25 when the ESSER funds and SPED ARPA funds expire.
They expire in 2026. You have to have all the money paid by 2026. Is that correct?
That might be the municipal grant.
This is a year earlier.
Yeah,
Okay, the ESSER is 2025.
September 2024, which is FY25.
Gotcha.
So this is where the question came up, right? So if you go back to the fall, and I can pull this up, if you go back to the fall, when you guys came in mid-November to give the 5-year estimates, from there, what the numbers I showed for, you had a line called grants revolving circuit breaker.
Right.
It wasn't broken out. It showed 4.2 million for fiscal year 2025, which is higher than the 4 million. So if they're expected to come down, they're actually going up. And so,
So there's different pots of money. ESSER is going to come down. The Student Opportunity Act is going to probably help with some other things going up. Circuit breaker is all dependent on what we
I understand,
in
I
for. So
understand all
it-
that, but
there's moving pieces.
I understand that. But again, if the ESSER 2 and 3, I don't even know what the size was, how much they were, but if those are substantial and the special ed were substantial, are we saying that the other grants are going to come in and offsets are going to come in that will match that and even exceed it? That's the question.
We'll have growth in the circuit breaker funding models changing to factor in transportation.
Okay.
Being done over time.
Yep.
So that will increase and that's a significant offset. We're forecasting 3% growth in the entitlement grants, special ed IDA grant and the Title I grant. These numbers might not sync up exactly with the projection from the fall. We do have some new information, but big picture wise, we are going to lose a little bit of revenue from ESSER. We're going to have a growth in circuit breaker. And we're expecting 3% growth in the IDA. Title I, Title IIA is pretty small, but the entitlement grants that we receive.
I think we want to just name, we've been really careful with ESSER so that we didn't build things in that were recurring. And in the very couple places we've been weaning them into the budget. So there's no big cliff coming. That we've been very careful about in terms of monies, ESSER 3 was the big one. It was 995,000 at CPS that we've been spending over 3 years. So we didn't dive in deep and use that all up. The others were much less. Not nominal, but certainly not millions.
I would be interested in a detail on the grants and where the grant came from, how it was spent.
We
So
have
we
that.
can
in-
get
that, yeah.
we can get a feel for, and I appreciate you, Lori, exactly, like, we don't want those to get built in permanently when they go away. I mean, this happens in the town, grant for the police department, an extra staff person. Now
So
you
we
gotta pay
provided the
for
school
them.
committee all that information
Okay.
back in December, so we can just. bring
Okay,
the slide up.
I think that would be really, really useful. And when you said you weaned it into the budget, well, that wasn't exactly what we want to see happen, but
Well, but I'm going to name those were mental health professionals that,
just-
rather than the whole FTE
I'm-
coming to you at once, we've done it in small
I'm
increments.
just saying it's incremental.
Yep.
And I also, obviously, the average teacher salary is a little, eye-opening. And if you take the average teacher salary and then multiply it by the average classroom size and FTE, and, it's just a roll-up, which is how we get to a higher expense. So I'd be interested in a plan what your plans are to get that average teacher salary down.
I'm not going to answer that. The school committee bargains with them, and I value my teachers very much.
I do too, but
yeah.
But it's an excellent question.
and
And
I know you have the negotiations coming up next year, so thank God it's not this year. But go ahead, Dee.
so I was going to ask, when you have the negotiations, there are two different components, right? There'd be an increase if you want to make an adjustment, but then there's also a COLA. And the COLA is every year, right? A COLA increases every year. What percentage is that? Do you know offhand?
For this year?
Sure, for
Is that
this
what you're
year.
asking? So the contract we're in right now has 2.75.
So every year the current contract, there's a 2.75 increase.
No, Dee, so that was the contract negotiated 3 years ago.
Peggy, let me
Okay.
just finish. Okay, so in this contract that they're in right now, every year there's a 2.75%.
This year, it was actually 2.5 the first year and then
Oh, okay,
2.75 for the
2.75,
second
And
2
that's the
years.
COLA increase. But when they negotiated, wasn't there a general increase in their salary?
No,
And no salary.
No.
So the only thing that increases, I'm just trying to understand
Teachers
because you have
advance
steps and
with
lanes.
experience.
Steps and
they
lanes are
advance a
different,
Step
yeah.
and with additional education,
and
they advance a
steps.
lane.
Okay. But in the negotiations, there's only the COLA that's negotiated? That's the only,
yeah, among a lot of other language and things like that.
among the other language in terms of steps and lane increases or?
Steps and lanes follow suit usually with the COLA. I've never bargained a step and lane column separately.
So the range, I mean, I'm familiar with the steps and the ladders. So the range within each unit, say, is not being negotiated. So the minimum and maximum for a particular salary.
We have not. You could mutually agree to decide to do that if it was an item that were put on the bargaining table. We have not. I'm going to be really frank with you that the lower end of the salary schedule is actually not as competitive. I have candidates coming in from other districts looking right at me and saying, I can't come for a pay cut. So it's because of the veteran nature of our staff that those numbers are where they are. We retain our teachers, which is a good thing. The lower end of our salary schedule is not as robust by any stretch. So I'm not sure we want to open all that up because I think it would probably go a different direction than what you all would hope for. So.
Dr. Hunter, do the salary numbers include add-ons such as coaching?
No, those are
Sports or
stipends if
just-
they work beyond the school day.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yep.
So this is just in the class.
So I'm curious about one other thing. I remember a couple of years ago, the former finance person was saying how when a teacher retires, the pension, the number of pensioners that we have is increasing and their costs are significant. Do you show that any place here?
That would be in the regional district, not in the municipal district.
Not in the municipal district. Where would it be? It happens.
The
at both
town may
places,
carry some of
right?
that if there's.
The
cost.
town would carry the increase in the pensioners' costs. Is that correct?
They carry the overall
That's through
retiree
CMS.
costs. So, right.
Okay, and at the regional, and maybe it was a little more
We
clear.
budget our share of the pension assessment that the Concord Retirement Board tells us what that figure is.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So just when we do the breakout, can we just make sure we have a similar breakout relative to the future costs that you guys shared with us? And if those have changed, that's fine, but just so that we've got some sense of what we might expect in the future, taking the new assumptions into account.
Which breakout, just so we're.
We talked about the grants that Peggy wanted to see.
Oh.
Breakout for the past, right? If we just get the future, that would be helpful, because again, that was one of the major questions we had as we look to the future, right? What are we expecting relative to the cost growth that we're seeing?
To the
as
best of
well?
our ability, I guess we.
Oh,
could
yeah,
do
the
that.
estimates are always the
Yeah.
best of everybody's
Yeah.
ability.
I would also ask on teacher salary. This, going back to my experience with the median home in Concord, there's a big difference. There can be a big difference between median and average. And I'd be interested in the median as well as the average, because I think it's a more accurate representation of where our salary, and if we can get it for other districts, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't
sure
know
we
if that's
can.
possible, but average, can be really tilted by a few,
We'll check. I don't know if that one's available.
high numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can get this chart done in median, I just would be interested in that as a,
Yeah, we
Comparison.
could check if it's available. I don't
okay.
recall that
Thank
it
you.
is.
Just one question. I had watched the presentation where you talked about the ARPA and the grants and the spending and so forth. So part of it is related to summer school. So you use 2 years of it for summer school. How is it that that goes away? Is it, were there special
So there's still
programs or-
budgeted number in, those are additional to the budget because of
Okay.
COVID impacts. We've been,
So as,
broadening.
so to the extent COVID is done, then
we're
they're
going to
those
stay
costs
within the
are out.
budget. Yeah, we'll be back within the budgeted amount.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like the program has to be funded somewhere else.
No.
No, it was significantly expanded for a couple of years. And-
Thank you.
One piece I just wanted to note here, and this is actually from the town's budget book last spring, just history of the budget increases the CPS has had from FY13 on. You can see from FY13, 14, 15, it was 4.5, 4.7, 4.2%. 16, I'm sure some of you were there for the big jump at 6.5. And then since 17, we've been hovering in the lower threes mostly. And it just seemed worth noting that the 4.7 isn't historically unheard of, the ask right now. And I think I say that because the conditions we're operating under are historic and we're still bringing a budget that's not historically unreasonable.
So can I just,
Sure.
whether it's 4% or 2% or 3%, it's difficult to understand the context without understanding where you are and where you want to go, right? And I've said it, and I know I'm beating a dead horse, but having some context around where do we want to go? How are we getting there? Have we gotten there? How much more? That helps understand and place into context, 6.5% increase. So again, I'm not passing judgment whether the 6.5 was appropriate,
I'm
too
going to let
high,
the school
too low.
committee
It
answer
just,
because they have a lot of
it's hard.
information that
That's
this
all.
group doesn't have.
We've gotten a lot of information and I look at that as our role as a school committee to look at that and setting goals. And we've gotten many presentations all year about all of these things. But again, we're talking about children. We're talking about goals, individual goals that they're meeting. Special ed, it's the same thing. These are not just numbers. They are children with needs. There are children that have their needs to be met. We have an obligation to do that. So as much as I know that you're looking for metrics and numbers and things like that, some of it we have in more narrative form that we have all sorts of data to back it up. But we're talking again about children. We're talking about their goals and their needs and what our teachers are doing in the classrooms. Our class sizes are larger. But we're still performing and we're performing high. And I think that's where I sit as a school committee member, and that's how we should be looking at it.
I understand we're talking about children. As a parent, I get that. So I don't, and we're in front of the public school committee. I get that. Again, the metrics just help context. Again, I asked whether the class sizes should be higher or lower, right? And just help us understand, we want to get to 12, we're at 11, we need to add something. So that's the kind of context that the public should have. We don't have time to put in all the time you guys do on a regular basis, and it's appreciated. But just distilling that down to say, hey, this is kind of what we're seeing at a macro level. That's why I kept asking about what are the metrics? What do we expect? How much further are we there? It was great to hear Lori say 15 is probably the lowest we can get, and we're at 16. So that's awesome, right? So having that context for some of the other major elements is what's helpful. And so, and what's, this is the reason I brought this up. What's not helpful from my perspective is to say, well, 4% is not unheard of given past. It may be, it may not be enough, right? Depending on where you want to go. So that's why I was asking.
To me, Parashar, Lori talked about things like class sizes. I think we're comfortable with our class size. I think we're comfortable with our student-teacher ratios. I think we're comfortable-ish, with our student achievement. We're certainly comfortable with it at the high school, as we showed you. Are there gains to be made at CPS? I think so. And I think the context, which is I think what we tried to do in this proposal, is to say, okay, we need 4% to maintain this, because even just to maintain the achievement that we're seeing, the needs are the variable. The needs have become more acute. We have more kids. I think Lori said it really eloquently the other day when she said, if we're in a mental health crisis, the kids in our classrooms are not in a state and ready to learn. So we can't even get these kids to achieve, even when we have the best teachers, if they're not in a mental state to be there to be the beneficiaries of our excellent staff and our excellent curriculum. So to me, the reason you might see this budget increase and to maintain levels of achievement that we are frankly we're pretty comfortable with, is the needs are significantly more. So to just do the same, we need more, because the kids, I don't know, the kids are not all right, and they're not. So that to me is the context and the story more than anything.
There's one more chapter, which is the next slide, because all of that said, I'm bringing a level service budget. And that's really important, because we're going to reallocate. Teachers are going to do different things. Everything is going to change within the structure of what we have for resources to meet that, now that we've built out the continuum of special ed. So Bob broke out, and I'm going to let you talk this through, broke out the buckets of category, especially at CPS, where 80% of it's salaries. So in terms of breaking this down, it's worth noting that special ed is special ed. We must service the children. The needs are very different than they have been. But we're also absorbing utilities. We're absorbing 8% inflation. I haven't brought that up once to you, that those numbers are off the charts right now, and tried to use it as a way to say 4.5 is really good. But we're going to just absorb it, and that's having an impact, of course. So do you mind just running through this slide a little bit?
So contractual expenses includes all our salaried positions, teachers, staff, bus drivers. It also includes vendors that we contract with. We have preventative maintenance contracts for our buildings. And so that's the bulk of our expenses, almost all 40 out of 45 million. And really what's driving most of that are positions that we've added related to special ed. When you've seen our budget increase, there was a 7.3 or 7.5 FTE increase. It's special ed tutors. It's a BCBA. It's a one-to-one nurse for a student who requires one-to-one support. And a Sanborn's Connection Program position. So the contractual expenses is level service, and it's basically special ed staffing that's driving that number. In addition, contractual increases. The out-of-district tuitions I presented at the top, but it's a little bit misleading. At the bottom, I show it gross and with the offsets. The offsets are the circuit breaker funding and the IDA funding that we're applying can go towards those costs. So at a gross level, our out-of-district tuitions are going up by 250,000. Most of that's the 14% increase that the state approved. And-
Sorry,
Oops.
I had to plug in or you were all going to be in the dark any second. I'll get you back 1 second.
We can
You
look
keep
at,
going.
keep going.
Yeah, I'm trying to, the
We can look at our
275
hard copy.
the 275 is essentially mostly the 14% OSD increase. And as of yet, there's no word that we're going to get any relief for that. We're hopeful, but we're budgeting what we know. We have factored in, you can see in the offsets to leverage some of the current year circuit breaker to kind of cushion that impact. The other lines are supplies, is utility costs are going up, as we've all seen.
I'm sorry, Bob, to go back to the out-of-district tuition offsets,
Oh, thanks.
115, is that the circuit breaker, the 100,000 roughly we talked about, or
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I'm busy trying to power up here so that Bob.
That
answers.
includes
is that what that was?
circuit breaker, yes, additional circuit breaker funding.
So if we didn't do that, we'd propose an offset of 1.232. Was that? That's what we would have done, right? But then based on Wednesday's meeting, the other Wednesday,
We would have
that's
used,
150.
we would have used 15,000 more. That was our plan, and we
Okay.
increased it by
Okay,
100.
okay,
Yeah.
I see. Thanks.
Utilities, we actually had a little bit, we came in a little bit under budget last year, so the increase would have been more than 9%, but we had a little bit of savings last year. So that's something we're hoping to see stabilization next year, and we factored in some stabilization based on conversations with David Wood and Brian, just kind of get some sense of where rates were going.
It's been warm.
What's that?
It's been a warm winter.
But this is for
Snow and
next year.
ice. Snow and ice is down.
Maybe all the hot air in this room might
Yeah, right.
be well preserved for next winter.
And then the supplies and materials costs. This is a place where we are seeing the inflation. So that includes instructional materials. It includes actually the diesels in here too, the bus transportation related supplies and repairs that they have. It also includes technology costs. And so we've kind of seen that with the pressure on the supply chain that those prices have come up. So overall, that gets us to 4.7. And I would say kind of just putting a broad context on this. And I'm coming in and kind of have a perspective that we have built out our special ed programs during this year. We have built them to kind of a full capacity. We now have programs at the middle school. We have programs at the elementary school. The savings that we were getting in special ed to offset our increases is gone. And so some of that is affecting this year's budget. And some of those, I think, are a lot of the things that we're talking about here are not things that we necessarily expect. I'm not going to, predict or forecast other than, we'll do our best when we do our projections, but student needs are a lot more variable than I've worked in a lot of industries, in the municipal sector. Student needs are hard to predict. And so we've seen years where the out of district numbers come down. This is a year they're going up. And so, we will do our best to manage amidst that, but that's kind of a broad context for where we are.
It does feel like every year it's, we're all happy or somewhat happy in certain years. And then it always feels like the big budget increases get laid all over sped. And I just, do you have a program where you set aside money, sort of like the snow and ice account at the town, where you can set aside money for sped and then dig into it to try to
That's circuit
level
breaker.
that? Is that allowed?
Stabilization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have one. So we could certainly talk about that
What do
offline.
you think? I mean,
When we have money to put into the
Somebody has to
stabilization.
put money in it. Correct.
it feels
Let's
like
say the
that's
money
all,
line.
and I get it. I totally get it. It's not an excuse, but it seems like it's a repeated explanation for surprisingly high budget increases and somehow some approach to leveling that I would probably favor over time. I'm only speaking for myself, and God knows I don't speak for my members. Ever.
I would, yeah.
Is that a complaint or a compliment?
It's a reality.
I'd like to just make a couple of brief comments. I think that 5-year trend chart was helpful. I think that reduction in the growth rate that came in 17, if I'm not mistaken, is when the sustainable growth rate was introduced by the FinCom, so that we could give, work together on targets. And I think that I'd like to give you some context there too, to think about level services. Level services, we look at the sustainable growth rate as what we think can result in level services for the taxpayers. So when you ask for something above that level, essentially asking all of us and the others who aren't here to reduce their spending, reduce their services outside of the schools. And that's how we look at it. I know I personally was looking in here for some reason to recommend that, is looking for something that says, we have an issue we need to address. We have whatever it is, but I don't hear that. What I hear is we're doing great, which is wonderful. And I'm really thrilled to hear it. I didn't doubt it. I know that you guys all work really hard, and we really all are one team here. We're not, I also don't think this is a negotiation of any sort. It's not that kind of a thing. We're all the town working together toward the same goals of high achieving schools. And hopefully, a town that people who live here today can afford to remain in. One of the things we need to do, FinCom, I think, is look back and see the percentage of our total town tax dollars that are going into the schools and whether or not it's a sustainable trajectory over time, because I think we've been squeezing other parts of town that none of us are happy about, roads that need repair, et cetera. And we need to make sure that we have a sustainable growth rate and level services throughout Concord, both, at town level, school level, and family and taxpayer level. So I just wanted to add that context.
Thank you, Don.
I wanted to give you some more context too on sort of the overall tax bill and where we are. So the sustainable growth rate, we had a kind of a range between 2.54 and 3.71. That's where we were. Right now, the guideline in total is 366, which translates into about 4% on the tax bill. And that's before everything else, right? So that's operating budget, X debt service, X benefits. When you put those things in, we're up close to 8%. That's a big nut, right, to swallow. So that's part of what we look at, right, is the overall picture. We all have to look at it, right? So that's one of my questions for the school committee is how do we collectively feel about an 8% increase, right, in the tax bill for 24? And it's, part of that is it's not all you, right? It's the town, it's the excluded debt, it's everything. But that's a big number, right? And so that's what we're struggling with as well, right? So we think I won't speak for the committee, but at 366 and it translating into a 4% tax bill compared to where we've been, which is under 3, I don't really have a lot of room to go anywhere. So that's part of the challenge.
So I finished these. I've got 2 left. So thank you. We do appreciate all that for sure. Just to note, last year when we got to guideline in the spring, we took quite a bit of risk. And then there were things that we shouldn't probably have risked and had to find funding for. And Bob and I will talk through how we managed to make this work. Part of getting to guideline last spring was reducing our contingency. We had 140,000 in there. I think we reduced 113 of that. So essentially we didn't have any contingency. This is the short list of needs that came up that had at one point been in the budget, and we chipped away to meet you and then had to reinstate. So they are special education related, there's no question, but it is partly why we're here, because this, when you hear we're asking for 8 FTEs, which I think is the number, it's 7 of them are already had to be put in for this school year because of the special education needs that were around us. So there's one additional position for the expansion of that one intensive sped program into Sanborn. But otherwise, it's needs we had to meet regardless of what budget we had all agreed on. Bob will talk through how we managed to make this happen. And I think this is where the grant and ESSER conversation is really important, because to pull this off flat for this school year, we used one-time funds to do it. And that's partly why you've got a 4.7 ask now because of that. So do you want to just talk through?
Sure. So the first thing we did was we used ESSER funds. They don't have the typical rules that you can't supplant. So we had ESSER funds that we could use for special ed to apply them to some of the tuition costs. Savings and tuitions can be transferred to other lines. But between the two, between the ESSER and SPED ARPA grants, approximately 165,000 of budget relief was provided. So these are not kind of one-time things that we paid for. It's one-time revenue that we applied to our operating budget. We used 100,000 in current year circuit breaker revenue this year, more than we planned. And at the end of FY23, we prepaid 100,000 in special ed tuitions, which kind of serves the same purpose as using current circuit breaker revenue. So the total of those things that are one time and they're not sustainable are 364,000. The ESSER funds and SPED ARPA funds are essentially spoken for in FY24's budget. And we're not anticipating prepaying for any tuitions this year. And we are already leveraging our circuit breaker carryover, I think to an extent that we feel is, about as far as we can go prudently. So those are the one-time funding sources that we've.
So I'm sorry, Bob, can you just go over those again? I got a combination of ESSER funds and SPED ARPA at 105.
165.
165, sorry. Okay, thank you. So that gets to 365. So 365 there, but the total costs here, 150, 250, 310, 310 roughly. How do I reconcile the two? I'm confused.
We have other costs.
Yeah,
that
this
are
list
over and
wasn't
under.
completely.
Just a couple of the
Yeah,
biggies.
these were highlights.
So there were $300,000 other costs that were not in the budget that you also had to meet?
No, these were applied towards these costs. There's a little bit of excess here that covered other overages. They're essentially.
So let me just make sure I understand this. So there's about $300,000 worth of costs for the nurse, the out of school district placement, et cetera, right? Those are costs, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And then you said it was financed by $365,000 worth of grants.
Various sources that he just went through, ESSER and.
The
circuit
total
breaker.
365.
Yeah, it's a little over what's here. But essentially, we're trying to give you an example of what wasn't funded. This might not be the complete list. Example of what wasn't funded. These were the bigger ticket items and how we made that work. So our budget's in the black.
So there were some other unfunded things. but
Yeah.
I'm just trying to reconcile the two.
Sure.
So, okay.
Could you say you took money from one line and moved it into another? Which is not, not uncommon.
But not within the budget, from outside the budget, which is the concern that we used ESSER to do it, circuit breaker to do it, places that don't sustain. Because the budget was too tight to move stuff just within. We did do a lot of that, and I'll name that we worked really hard last summer to hire so that we had savings to offset other overages. Like, it was a really rough summer, a very stressful summer, and trying to be sure that we set up a school year for this budget to come out in the black in June. And between this work that Bob did and the work the principals did to hire high quality for cost effectiveness and gain some savings there through attrition, like, we were hitting we were tapping every avenue we had to make this budget balance. That's the point. I guess we can get into the numbers more if you'd like, but the point is to do that, we didn't plan on using ESSER to balance this budget this year. We didn't plan to go another 100,000 into circuit breaker. It's just part of why we are where we are for FY24, because those costs are now showing in the budget.
Not available this year.
Correct.
Got it.
And then the last slide, which
I'm sorry, just quick question, because I'm dense sometimes. If we go back to the 5-year trend number, fiscal year 23 that we're still in,
Right.
447,078. Does that include this other spend that was not originally in the budget? And what about the offset?
yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, so there is still some ESSER funds being spent in 24.
Let's just start with the top line for a minute. The 47,078,078, does that include this additional spend of 300,000? That's what I'm trying to understand. Just the top line first.
It's our full spending for the year. Yes.
So that includes
Grants
this
and
300,000, this
Yes.
additional spend.
Yep.
Okay. And the offset line, if we stay on that same
Stay on
page.
that slide. That one?
Yep. The 4 million offset includes the 365 that you just shared with us as well. It's built in there.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay.
And the last slide, which none of us wanted to be having this part of the discussion, but to demonstrate what would have to happen in order to get to guideline. We tried to show you why this is the list. We would never touch staff as a first pass. We've done all that work already. So the list we're bringing now is student facing and as far from the core classrooms as possible, but it has certain impacts to programming and other aspects of the district and what makes us us. Again, this list is bigger than the 585. We pick from this list, not all of it, partly because it's February and to know exactly what to cut 8 months before school year starts is a little tricky. So the list right now is inclusive of the district sponsored field trips. We would either not go or parents would pay. We have a special education coordinator, K-5, who helps to oversee all of those programs and needs that we've been talking about. We'd eliminate that. 2 to 4 tutors, which is a risk every time I try to cut tutors because certain needs might pop up and I need to put them back, but we would look at support staff. Technology specialists, right now we have 1 per school. We would look to share among schools. Those are our certified educators with backgrounds in technology and how to use the educational side of technology, not just the technical side. The STEAM lab here at Ripley, which was a $1 million project renovation a few years ago and now thrives on bringing kids over from the schools. That / data coordinator, a couple of the curriculum position we have, there'd be a 1 FTE reduction there, which would mean the STEAM lab would not be fully utilized or we'd be scrunching numbers differently than we are right now. Reduction possibility of K through 5 instrumental music, which would mean instrumental music would start at the middle school for individual lessons. General music would stay in place, but kids taking lessons and having band would not start till middle school. We'd reduce professional development again, which is always concerning with all the initiatives and needs that we have. We look at librarians to share across K-8. I'll just note, we have preparatory time for teachers to cover with librarians at K-5, so the middle school would have the most dramatic impact. And we could look to reduce transportation. The law says we only have to transport beyond 2 miles from the school. And we certainly right now do transport within the 2 miles, and we could look to increase the number of walkers and parent providers. None of this is my recommendation. I think this is getting into the services and delivery of the schools at their core, which is why the level service budget at 4.7 is what we've proposed. And I think that's all the information we pulled together for you, and
Are these in priority order by any chance?
they're not.
Well, I will
Just asking.
say myself, I think this is an incredibly responsive and detailed presentation of where your numbers are coming from. A couple of the slides, I'm not going to talk about SPED so much, but class size, we're at 18. That's gone at K8, 18, that's gone up every year in your slide from 18. Concord Carlisle, we're up to 19. I honestly think there's more room at the high school. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you get a class of, AP math students, you can go above those numbers.
19 is the average. I know we're not here to talk, we have well into the 20s at the high
Yep.
school. Yeah.
And those are at the higher numbers on the slides. The ratio of the CPS enrollment, the CPS pre-K is gone down. And so has 6 through 8, but we're in that bind where it's distributed evenly amongst the 3 elementary schools. So you can't really lose a class. And as I said, the enrollment's gone up. So it will be interesting to see how that comes forward with the new middle school. Don't forget to vote tomorrow. The professional staff, the projections, I think the average per pupil spending has always been high in Concord. It's been high for 20 years. We get compared to the exact same schools since, 2000, especially Acton, Boxborough. I don't know what they do with their numbers, but it continues to roll forward. And that's kind of been on the table as a major comparison for that period of time. Obviously, our number is on the higher side, but it's not outrageously higher than some of the other towns. I think the teacher salary obviously jumps out. No question about that. But, where, and we've gone through a lot of, and your reductions, I think are very thoughtful. And, where do we go from here? And
So Peggy, I have some
yes.
comments on
yes,
the.
thank you, Kathy. I'm
on
not ending.
Okay.
I'm just summarizing.
Okay.
And then I'm going to ask all the members of the FinCom here and on anyone online, if they'd like to make some comments. Kathy.
Well, I wanted to comment on the last slide with the where reductions potentially could be taken. And my first thing is I would note that each line item says reduction. It doesn't say elimination, which I think is great. That just means somewhat less. 2 things stood out to me. I don't think they can be high impact in terms of dollars. Certainly not $500,000, but district-sponsored field trips and instrumental music strikes me as something that parents can pay for because it's their specific children, as opposed to, as Chris had pointed out, we're looking at the overall burden on every taxpayer. So, it just seems to me that there could be something there that gives more of a direct impact. Similarly, the items of, reduction of tutors, how many tutors do we have in K through 8?
I don't have the number right handy. We're always assessing tutors and building based on what we need. So tutors are a critical component of special education services.
Well, I would think that they're critical. Again, I'm just trying to put in context, a reduction of 2, is that out of 20? Is that out of 10? Is it out of 2 or is it out of
Probably,
4?
no, it's more, I don't want to guess. I'm going to guess wrong.
Okay. I mean, you don't have to answer me right now, but
We can find that out.
Yeah, it's upwards of 50 for sure.
okay. So again, I, look at some of these and am hopeful.
Well, except I'm and I don't want to debate each one of these, I don't think tonight, like
No.
each one of these has such significant impact, or I would have cut it already. I want to get to guideline with all of you. We're to the point we don't have the room to do that without real impact. And to your point, every year we try to reduce a few tutors, and every summer needs come back, and then I'm putting them back without them being funded. And that's a cycle we're running up against the wall on, that cycle of gambling, and then it has to get put back and we have to reallocate.
Well, maybe the field trips or the instruments, again, I think that those can be direct expenses of certain,
Can I just make a comment about field trips? So we are doing a lot of equity work, and what parents K to 5 are responsible for anyway is school supplies. And so I look at myself, I have 4 kids. It's about $100 per parent per year that you're paying. So if you have 4 kids in elementary school, the parents are shouldering that burden already for providing notebooks, tape, wipes for the classroom. Because when Dr. Hunter got here, that was a real shift in change for some cost savings. And so I could be looking at $2,400 as a parent while my kids are K to 5 in just school supplies. So now we have field trips, and you do have families that cannot afford a field trip. And then we have to have a scholarship for those families. So, it sounds like, yeah, we can cut that. And I look at K to 5 instrumental. We have a thriving music program at our middle school and our high school. It is a reduction of staff because it is a reduction of a program. So even though we're reducing, it is eliminating programs. I think that's the point in all of these reductions. It is an elimination of something.
so Tracy, my point is that rather than asking other people who, again, I'm concerned with people on fixed incomes in this town, and the fact that we may be asking for 8% more, which is a substantial over $1,000 increase for people who may not have the money. So if I have a child, I can pay for my child, but I don't want to be asking my neighbors to. That's my point.
Thank you, Kathy. Do we want to, everyone else on the FinCom, Christine?
No, I mean,
What's that?
I would go back to my earlier question, which is, how do we deal with the 8%, right? So we're all in this, right? So what are we going to do? And I've been on this committee for FinCom for 5 years. So since you've been here, Dr. Hunter, and I think we've had a struggle with CPS just about every year, not everyone, but during COVID it was a little easier, but we were always struggling with it. And the rate of growth there is higher. So how do we solve for it, right? So every year we kind of put a Band-Aid, we come up with this, we put some of the reserve, but we're always, sort of hanging on by our fingernails to get the number. And that's a problem. So that's the sort of, I look at it across the town and say, well, what do we do? How are we going to ask the town to absorb those increases? That's a question I have for the school committee and for the select board. Right? It's not FinCom's problem. It's all of our problems. It's the town's problem. I think when people get a $1,200 or $1,300 increase in their bill, it's going to be pretty surprising. I don't care who you are. That's a big bump.
Yeah.
So, and that's half of having the middle school in there. There'll be another half the next year. And the 4%, if that's what we're going to be looking at for CPS, then we know the town has had deferred a bunch of stuff, right? So the town has issues on salary big time, right? So we're going to have another hit when the comp study comes out on that. So I understand what you've done. I appreciate the work that you've done in the budget, but I think we have a problem as a town on the fiscal side, and I don't know how to solve it, without having perhaps a deeper discussion on either we need more revenue, right? So we're always talking about what the costs are. So is there a way to get more revenue? So either from the business side, from fundraising, from fees in the schools, I don't know, or fees in the town side, or efficiencies. There's only a couple levers we have to pull, right? If costs are going to grow at 4%, what do we do? And so that's my dilemma, I guess. I think it's all of
It is the dilemma. Dee, anything else from you?
Just a couple of thoughts and a couple of questions for the school committee members. 2 things. I'd like to ask you, what are the needs of our students, our needs? and the costs associated with those needs. And the second one is, what are our wants? We want everything for our kids. We want everything for our town. But can you differentiate between a need and a want? Because if we can have a bucket of wants that we can say, okay, maybe next year or the following year, then we can focus on the needs and we can address those to the best of our abilities. And then there might be this little bucket of wants that has a cost associated with them, and they can be used in our town for other things, because we have a town that has tremendous needs as well, and they've been deferred. So I just want you to think about those two questions.
Thank you, Dee. John?
Yeah, I think it's important to support this increase, given a lot of the additional costs going on with the special needs and some of the fixed costs in this budget. I think the town is reaching a breaking point, and you're seeing it, and you're unfortunately here, and it's a much bigger point that is being raised on the revenue side and how much the town can withstand on a sustainable basis. I just think you're taking a lot of the brunt of it now, but it's important to consider next year and going forward, because I think the discussion is going to get much harder as we go forward. But I think all of these are super important components of the students going forward for next year.
Thank you, John. Don?
First, I want to thank you for creating the schools that we have here. I really appreciate the hard job you're in and the success you've achieved. My big worry is that we've created something that we can't, it has momentum and has a carryover for the next decade that we can't afford. And so there are two things to add up to that. One is that I don't think that personally I need to understand or could possibly have any valuable input on the line item spend. It's really only the bottom line of what it is, and you set the priorities within the bottom line. I've been in similar situations many times where other people have the decision of where to spend the money, but no. And sort of our job as a town is to say, here's how much money you can spend. Please use it to the best for our kids. And I also wanted to add, just so you know, there are many people, some on this committee and others, who are brainstorming and working on ways that we can increase the revenue to the town, because that's the other half of this, so that we can continue what we have and we can fund the other needs in the town without, and our residents don't have to keep reducing their spending on other things in order to support the town. So that's the context. I think, again, if you try to conceptualize that, guideline spending means level services for taxpayers, and above guidelines means a reduction of other things. Can you visualize yourself standing at town meeting and asking the community, can you please reduce your spending, reduce your lifestyle so that we can do this? And I think that the town responds well to these requests. I mean, this is a fantastically generous community, but that's the way we have to think about it. Okay.
Thanks, Don. Lindsay?
Well, I've learned a lot tonight, so this is really helpful. It was such a thoughtful presentation, so thank you very much. And I agree with what John said, that it feels like, it stinks that we're kind of in this position where you're kind of getting the brunt of this, where it feels like there are a lot of factors that are not controllable that are causing a lot of these increases. And it feels that, just to echo what Chris said and what Don said, that we have this structural problem. We're going to keep coming back with this same issue year after year, because we know that an hour of time in the classroom with the teacher is always going to have a higher inflation rate year over year than everything else in the economy. Like, these kind of structurally, these cost increases are just going to keep being a burden that is greater than other, or it's going to have higher inflation. So the only answer is to kind of change the equation or to have drastic improvements in efficiency that would take a lot of creative thinking or something we can't even see at this point that could improve the efficiency of teaching overall, because 90% of these costs are in teachers in the classroom, tutors in the classroom, right? So I agree that we have to kind of probably take care of this on the revenue side structurally over time and becoming a much, more business friendly, I think, community and having more housing. So this is kind of just a bigger problem than what we're trying to solve tonight. And it's going to be an exciting few years as we try to figure it out. But this was helpful tonight. And thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm just going to double check. Do we have any FinCom members attending on Zoom?
I saw her. I don't know if she's still there. She's gone off.
Oh, no. Okay. All right, then. Should we turn to the audience for any public comment?
Oh, yeah.
You have another meeting.
If you
wanna
want to
go
go to
to
the audience
Do
and
you
then.
want to do the audience first?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah. We'll go
I'm not
audience.
going to press you all for further information unless you want to add to what Dr. Hunter has said.
I mean, I think probably there might be members that would want to speak on our
Okay.
behalf, but
Fine.
I am certainly happy to hear public comment.
Why don't we
and
do
then let the
public
school committee
comments and then
conclude.
you can
All right.
respond
do
to
it.
anything else we hear, and really appreciate you all spending so much time with us. It's a long meeting already. Okay, on that note,
All right,
any
we have-
public comments?
Yeah, I got some people signed up, Peggy.
Look at you. I got a few in the mail,
Oh,
email. but-
I'm gonna, if some of you have submitted a form already, I'll call those people first. If you didn't submit a form and you still want to speak at the conclusion, just give a hand raise. I'm gonna
I-
call Sue Richardson.
I'm gonna
260
just make a quick
Elm
comment to the FinCom. I just realized that we didn't select one, so I'll scribe and we'll go from there. Just in case anyone's worried about that. Now you can really worry about that. Okay.
And just before you start, I don't know what the finance committee's like, but we're real strict and you get 3 minutes and I time you. So we
I'm
you guys are a little
I'm
bit more
learning something
laissez-faire.
every minute.
But you're in my room tonight, so I'm going with my 3 minutes.
Hey, I'm on.
We actually never get this level of participation, so.
I'm gonna say go.
Yeah, I'll come with my phone and my quacky little
I'm gonna
alarm
say
when it
go.
goes off.
I'll say go, Madam Chair, because I don't want to call you by your name in case anyone brought their little thing with them.
All right.
Sorry.
That wasn't part of my 3 minutes, right?
No, absolutely not. I haven't even clicked my button. All right. off you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sue Richardson, 260 Elsinore Street. I'm here to speak about my support, my deep, unabiding support for unfailing support for instrumental music in K through 5. I don't have anyone who will ever be in the elementary school again, but my family has benefited from starting instrumental music education at that young age, deeply benefited, and I've seen benefits with lots of other people. One thing I just wanted to say, to set just a piece of information clear in everyone's mind, is the instrumental music program in the elementary school does not pay for instruments for everyone, doesn't pay for private lessons for everyone. It's a community experience that most of the kids participate in. And yes, there are instruments, but everyone doesn't get their own instrument or private lessons paid for through the district. I'll cede the rest of my time to the rest of my family.
Thank you.
With that, next in line is actually Sophie Richardson. Sorry about that. We'll go to family memo.
Hi, I'm Sophie Richardson, also 260 Elsinore Street, and I'm a senior in the CCHS concert band. I'd like to speak about the value that elementary school band had for me during my time in the Concord Public Schools. I started playing trombone at Willard in fourth grade. And this March, upcoming March, I will be representing CCHS at the MMEA All-State Festival, having received the top score in the state. Hey, 3 minutes. I can say for certain that those 2 years of elementary school music were essential to my successful trajectory as a trombone player. If I hadn't started until middle school, or if I hadn't been in a program with 2 band teachers, I'd be farther behind in my musical development, and I would have missed out on the concentrated smaller group instruction and the large ensemble instruction, it is a large ensemble, that allowed me to really start digging into learning trombone in those early years. And for what it's worth, this year, 2023-2022 school year, is the first year that every current CCHS class, freshman through senior, started music in fourth grade, not fifth, and 94% of eligible students were accepted into the All-State Festival for our highest number of acceptees ever. An elementary school band is worth more than just 2 extra years of individual musical growth. It also provides the necessary foundation for such a robust 4 to 12 program, which we all know we have in Concord. Some of CCHS band's most cherished contributions to our greater community, like our pit orchestra, which is made up of student musicians, not hires. For the theater, our large pep band and our Prism concert, fan favorite, are at risk for disappearing if we lose our foundation in elementary school. My friend Jack Razziani, who is no longer in band, he can't be here, but he says the following. Band in elementary school was one of my favorite classes. Learning how to play an instrument from such a young age evolved into a cornerstone of my extracurricular interests throughout middle school and early high school. While I ultimately chose to focus on my sport, I continued to play my instruments outside of school and still consider it a passion. If I had to learn an instrument from scratch starting in middle school, I think pursuing it would have been much more difficult considering the already drastic change from 5th to 6th grade. I think every kid should have the opportunity, like I did, to learn to play and practice an instrument in elementary school. It was intellectually challenging to learn a new skill, creative, and it was great to already be part of a group heading into middle school. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
So typically we bounce back between the room and Zoom, and I do see someone on Zoom. So if you could state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Kristen Tyson, and I live at Hubbard Street in Concord. And I am actually the president of the Alcott PTG, but I am speaking tonight just in my own personal experience and thoughts about this particular crisis that we're in. I think it's really critical to come at this from a slightly different perspective than I've heard from the FinCom tonight. First of all, a huge thank you to all of you who volunteer on the Finance Committee and who volunteer on the School Committee. The School Committee are our elected officials. These are the people we have chosen to decide what our schools need. We've hired this incredible educator and expert, Dr. Hunter, who we're fortunate enough to have and who's brought us through the pandemic and through currently a mental health crisis for our children. So I'm asking the FinCom to look very seriously at both Dr. Hunter's budget, but also more importantly, the budget that the School Committee, our elected officials, these are the people who speak for our town, have adopted and have asked you to fund. I would ask you to change the posture to one more of listening. Even Dr. Hunter's first, I would say 10 minutes of her presentation, she was interrupted. I counted over 24 times. I think we really need to absorb what the recommendation is before we think about cutting it, before we decide that we can't afford excellence in education for our children and for the next generation. It's really critical to the future of our town that we invest now, and the best way to invest is in our children. I do think this delta is something that we can make up as a community, even if it means cuts in other places. I also have a budget and a family budget like most Concordians. We've also seen what has inflation done to our grocery bills, our energy bills. Why would that be any different at the schools? We see that their costs are rising. We need to cover those costs. Thank you so much for your time.
Could you repeat your name, please? I couldn't quite get that.
Kristen Tyson.
My name is Kristen Tyson.
Kristen Tyson. Thank you.
I just want to clarify something that Kristen said, and I appreciate the sentiment, Kristen. We don't fund anything, to be very clear. We are an advisory body whose responsibility is to look after the long-term finances of the town, making recommendations to town meeting. And it's all the citizens that show up at town meeting with all the information they have and they make their choices, just to be clear. So we're not funding anything. We're just in the position of making recommendations. People can take our recommendations or they can leave them.
Okay, I got a couple more blue forms and then I'll go to the hands raised, if that's okay. Your handwriting's as confusing as mine. I think it's Colin Jennings. Okay, I nailed it.
Hi there, Colin Jennings of 155 Mildred Circle. Try and anchor that down. A few thoughts about instrumental music as well. I'm a high schooler. I'm a senior who has played in orchestra since elementary school. For my statistics-driven room, I have a statistic from you from the University of British Columbia of 113,000 high schoolers who were surveyed. Of the ones that participated in instrumental music from elementary school to high school, they tested on average in all sorts of composites from English to science to math, about a grade level ahead. So that is a huge improvement, right? Things that you can't necessarily teach inside the classroom: diligence, determination, collaboration, a community-led event. That is fundamental to a student's success, both in the classroom and in the real world. You just cannot teach that without some sort of, metric where you can see how you're progressing, music programs and instrumental stuff. I would also argue that middle school and high school music programs don't work without the elementary school foundation. My experience alone, as an elementary schooler, I was, not so academically burdened as I was in middle school. And I had parents who forced me, I'm thankful of, to play an instrument. That footing in that instrument in elementary school, when your brain is more plastic and you're more receptive to ideas, let me progress in middle school and in high school. The elementary portion of this is absolutely crucial to the experience. We would not have the community-driven events, Prism, Pep Band, both of Prism, Pep Band, and Pit Orchestra, two of which I participate in, without that elementary school involvement. And certainly we wouldn't be going Golden Micah every year. So those are my feelings. My parents felt far more strongly about this. They actually chose Concord for their instrumental music programs because despite the fact that their involvement with performing arts was over 40 years ago, they had such a connection with the people they met there that they wanted to share that experience with me. I don't think I would be here without performing arts in elementary school. I don't think a lot of you would be here without performing arts in elementary school. I buy my time. That's all I have to say.
Next, I've got a Barbara Powell.
I would like to. Barbara Powell, 316 East Bridge Road, retired town employee and matriarch of a 3-generation family in a neighborhood that has a lot of kids. The kids are not okay. And one of the things that is happening is that they form some of their posses, their groups, their connections in music as well as sports and other things. And I am going to leave it to the kids. They're doing a much more eloquent job than I am, but I would hate to see that program discontinued.
May I?
Thank you. And then
I'd like to comment. It seems like we're getting an awful lot of people commenting on music, which it was just one small item on a very vast budget of $47 million. And the line item just says reduction. So I don't think there's anybody who's proposed to eliminate the instrumental program. So
I'm happy to clarify. It says reduction because we would look to eliminate 4th and 5th grade instrumental music lessons. It's one of the options on the table.
Well, okay. So my only other point had been that I went to schools where I didn't have that program. However, my parents paid for me to go to lessons. And that's all I'm saying is that this is the taxpayer issue. So
Can Alexa and Peggy, can I just make a comment? We typically at our meetings do not engage with the public. And so I would request that we not engage with the public during public
We're
comment.
strict here. We don't typically engage in a back and forth dialogue. So we'll keep to that because we're in our building. Our final person with a blue sheet is a Scott Richardson?
Richardson?
Scott Richardson, 260 Elsinore Street. As a taxpayer, I want a strong instrumental music program at all levels of public education. I don't want the joy of instrumental music only available to those students whose parents or guardians can afford private lessons or programs. I want our public schools to make available pathways to participation in collaborative music making at every grade as appropriate. It's not just for the rich. As a senior taxpayer, even if I don't have children in schools, I want to attend a school music performance because it's inspiring and local and inexpensive. It's easily accessible to me as I age. I want to hear my neighbors' children playing music while I walk through the neighborhood, even when they're starting out and it's mostly screeches.
Drums.
I want to hear high-level performance at the high school level, like you hear at CCHS. And I know that the remarkable quality of our high school program starts not in high school or middle school, but yes, in elementary school. As a taxpayer, I want every elementary school student to be exposed to the possibility of instrumental music at the developmentally appropriate time. The experts say that's in elementary school. That's when they're most adept at picking up a new language. As a taxpayer who was once a socially awkward middle school student, I want every middle school student to be comfortable and included in middle school. And for many students, band and orchestra is the place where they belong. I want them to have a chance to play an instrument, build confidence with that instrument before anyone tells them that they shouldn't. Finally, as a taxpayer, I want the real estate agent who sells my house when I'm long gone to say to those prospective buyers, our schools are great for many reasons. One of them is that there's instrumental music in every school. Thank you.
Thank you. I do see on Zoom, and then I'll go back to the room. I see a hand raised. If you could give your name and address. And unmute. There's three.
I see Carlin, Wilson, and an
Okay.
iPhone.
Sorry, I think Wilson was showing first on my screen, so I'll ask you.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So Wilson Kerr, 20 Damon Street. Just a couple comments. It's heartbreaking to hear this line of people standing up saying we need music in our schools. It's also a couple comments that I've heard from the FinCom. This notion of rubber stamping a budget, and Court brought this up at a meeting I was at, is certainly not the role. Nothing should be rubber stamped, but it's also been said by Lori at this meeting that they worked hard to cut this down, that what we're seeing is already been cut. This notion that that they came to the meeting with all this thick stuff and now it's our job to cut this and not give this is, I think, sort of a strange notion if they're doing their jobs and know that they don't want to come in with a budget over the recommendation. And then a comment about teachers' salaries. This, I heard someone say, well, we need to work to get that down. There's a cost to bringing people up through a system. Having teachers that are veterans means they cost more because there's a cost of living adjustment. They are rewarded for staying at $107,000 average. The per pupil average is dead center in the middle of the pack. And that speaks to the incredible skill of this group of Lori and her team that have done that with a teacher salary that's high, that represents 80%. This notion that we should push back and say, well, let's work to get that down. These teachers raise our children. They are the reason that we live in this town and we love this education system. It isn't the bricks and the roof overhead. It's these teachers are unbelievable in our town. And I just, this notion of I heard someone say let's work to get that down. That's really eye-opening. I view that as an incredible badge of honor. And someone on social media recently said we should have people should try and bring that up. There's lots of things we can cut. I'm sure you guys have a huge budget. There's fire, there's police, there's all sorts of other things. There's roads, there's potholes. But the one thing you shouldn't cut is teachers' salaries, or try to. Music programs being cut. There must be a way to meet this budget. And again, just to repeat, just know that Lori came into this meeting with these things already cut, or she wouldn't have had them in there. Anyway, just a few comments from what I've heard tonight. Thank you.
Thanks. Back to the room. Gray on the left with glasses. My left. If you could give your name and address.
Hi, I'm Erica Jocelyn. I live at 94 Dover Street. I've been the library media specialist at Willard Elementary School since 2009. My position is on the potential cut list. In 2019, my family and I bought a house near White's Pond. We chose to move here, even though our daughter could have gone to Concord Public Schools regardless. We wanted to be part of this town because Concord's values aligned with our own, particularly Concord's commitment to providing an exceptional education to all students. My daughter is in 2nd grade. She has tentatively chosen the trombone as the instrument she would like to play in 4th grade, that she would like to play as part of the school band. I can't imagine sending her to a school in which only the students whose parents pay for private lessons have the opportunity to learn an instrument. This is not in line with a strategic plan focused on equity. I can't imagine sending her to a school where she won't be taught how to develop her critical media literacy skills in a world of fake news, or how to make sense of her rights and responsibilities as a digital citizen in an increasingly online world, both of which are core components of the current library curriculum. Denying students these opportunities is not in their best interest, and it is not in line with Concord's commitment to our community. So I ask that you fully support these programs in order to give our kids the best possible education. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to Zoom. I see Harlan Reed. If you could unmute.
Sure, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. I must compliment the FinCom on its diligence in examining the school budget. It's not an easy job that you have to do. Basically, your job is to say no and to give warnings for the future on what the future guidelines should look like. I think the message has been received by the school district. Their presentation has been diligent and detailed as well. But I would encourage the FinCom to seriously consider changing its guidelines to something that is more favorable towards the school district. And I also encourage the school district and FinCom to reach a negotiated agreed point so that when we come to town meeting on April 30th, there is one amount that is presented, not two. I don't really want to see the audience have to make a choice because they will. And if FinCom needs to find another $500,000 to eliminate from the town's budget, I suspect I can give you some advice on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Carlin. Back to the room. Hold on, those guys have had their hands up for a while. I see 3 in the back. There's a blonde, I don't know, gray, blonde. Okay. Doing the best I can.
I'm Beulah Pratt. I live at 23 Garden Road, a house that my parents bought. I think Dr. Hunter is my 7th superintendent, maybe. And I take her at her word. If she has cut this budget to the bone, she has cut it to the bone. And I've been here in this town since '97, and there's always someone who suggests there's a difference between our children and our children. My children aren't in this school district anymore. I'm paying for my children, as we should all, with the great privilege of living in Concord and owning property comes great responsibility. Our houses are worth a doo-doo load. We are going to have to pay taxes on them, and we are going to have to support our children. And if there is a question of our, enormous salaries, if you have this number of kids sitting for 3 hours at a FinCom meeting, you know how great your teachers are, without question. I would follow Dr. Hunter over a ravine. If she tells me we're cutting to the bone, we are cutting to the bone. Every 7-10 years, we have a meeting like this, and we have to pony up for other people's children. We are not pitting elderly people against our children. We are a town. We're going to come together. We're going to pony up for these guys because our kids are gone. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a final person on Zoom.
Yep.
Two, they keep coming.
iPhone and then Chris Tarlow.
I'll go with iPhone on Zoom. If you could unmute and give your name and address, iPhone.
Hi, yes, my name is Laura Lack. I'm calling from 24 Willow Street on Zoom. I just want to just first, similarly to other people speaking, just congratulate everybody in this open dialogue in regards to trying to come up with a solution, because that's really what our town is all about, is problem solving. And I think the importance, and I don't know that there's the solution is, but I do know that we know that there's a rising cost of inflation. The Federal Reserve is constantly trying to work on that, but it's still a trial by fire and trying to work that out. But we can tell from the global economy that, wages are continuing to be an issue. And with the budget that exists, a majority of that's coming from the Concord Public Schools is going to be related to wages. And this is going to be an ongoing problem, meaning that it's something problem that we need to have a solution for. And I do think that is going to involve creating additional funds to be able to make sure that we have the level of education that is required for equity and inclusion, as well as keeping the talented teachers and staff and administration that work in the town of Concord. These are things that we don't want to have to negotiate. I think the cost of having to do replacements on teachers can be extremely expensive and time consuming and also disruptive. So there is a whole business side of this where, if we're not making our budget in regards to what the, recommendations being made, there is a long lasting endeavor where they'll have to find cuts. And in that way, it doesn't create equity and inclusion, because there will obviously be areas that need to be eliminated that seem to be something that we critically need in this time and era in which we're recovering from a pandemic, where these kids have been put through a lot in the past 3 years. So I just encourage everybody to take a collaborative effort to try to make sure that we can kind of come together in agreement that, that everybody can live with. And then I concede my time.
Back to the room, Terry.
Hi, I'm Terry Ackerman, 89 East Ridge Road. I'm on the select board, but I'm speaking for myself, not the board. And I really want to thank both committees. This is a really excellent dialogue. It's taking 3 hours now of your time. Really appreciate it. I'm also really grateful for you looking at it as a town-wide and a structural problem, because I did serve on the FinCom also, and I don't remember back then that we were as aware of it being a structural problem. But it does seem like if we're going through, we're not prepaying tuition, we're starting to go through the surplus on the, I've forgotten the name of it.
Circuit breaker.
Circuit breaker, right. That it's starting to really become a worse problem. So I appreciate everybody's honesty about that. And, we're going to have to all be in this together and solve it. My question is, the high school does not seem to be having the same structural problem, not that I know of. And I'm trying to figure out, you've also got special education, utility costs, inflation, ESSER running out. And I know you don't want to get into a dialogue, but I am just really curious at some point to understand why it's only at the elementary school.
I am going to answer that one. Carlisle is absorbing the largest increase in history of the region because of the enrollment shift. We are having the same struggles, and we proposed a budget that to Concord was a very minimal increase overall, and Carlisle is working its way through an 8% increase on the high school budget alone. That's the simple answer. We'd probably be having the same discussion if the enrollment shift hadn't switched the heavier load to Carlisle.
We're one more on Zoom. Is it Chris Tarlow?
Yep.
Chris, yep, you're there.
Chris.
Hello. Yep, I'm Chris Tarlow, 1295 Main Street. And I just wanted to say, it seems to always come down to special ed setting everything over the top, but that is kind of the mission is and part of the law. You have to provide what kids need. So I think sometimes the budget is not, you can't just set it in stone and say this is what it is. So just hoping people can take that into account.
Thanks, Chris. Right, back to the room. And then okay, I see 3 hands up. Those are going to be my final 3. I'll go to 4. There were 4. Oh, I didn't even see. Okay, 4. And then I'm going to call it because we've given a long time to this. I'll go sweatshirt and jacket in the front.
Hi, I'm Jasmine Benham, 257 Neshoba Road. I used to be in the band, specifically in elementary school, and it was one of my most treasured experiences. I sadly had other commitments that were also really important to me, so I didn't have the time to spend on my instrument. But a part of me really, really regrets that, and that foundation that I had from being in a band with amazing teachers who kind of still have an impact on me now. Like I go to visit Mr. Nossi all the time. Amazing teachers that are super supportive of all the kids, and I think having private lessons would really take away from a huge part of it, which would be community engagement. And it was more about having a community for me than it was about playing the instrument. And you have that by having a group that you can be a part of. And I think some people were just a part of it because everyone else was a part of it. And it kind of just created this group environment. And I think if you start instruments later, you are already committed to other outside commitments, other sports. And so you don't even start to go into that instrument because you're like, oh, well, I don't have the time. And the amount of people that would reduce in high school band, I love going to their performances. It's absolutely amazing. And people like one of my best friends, Sophie, she's an amazing trombone player. And I am so proud of her and how far she's come and the schools she's able to get into because of that. And I think that that's just, if you don't have that foundation, you can't get there. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Vlad?
Liz Kroll, 212 Hubbard Street. I'd like to say first and foremost that I appreciate everyone's work. I am very concerned by comments about reducing teacher salaries for all the reasons that have already been said. The teachers are the heart and soul of our schools. They have opportunities to go elsewhere. As someone who hired in Lexington, I can tell you that it's a competitive market to get experienced, good teachers, and we should be so grateful to them. I'm concerned also about the comment that teachers work 10 months a year because they work all the time. I can tell you that. They work 12 months a year. They work 14 months a year. So I was a little dismayed to hear that. I do want to point out that the mental health crisis that Dr. Hunter alluded to is mitigated by the access to music and the arts. And the idea of the cuts at the elementary school, which we've heard the wonderful testimony of our really great students tonight, breaks my heart. Because I think we have no idea, as some of the people who are no longer doing music have told us, about the long-term effects of that program. And I want to say finally, because I feel like I have to be the hippie liberal and say this, and it goes back to the 80s and Jonathan Kozol's groundbreaking work. There are savage inequalities in this country. Our choices are heartbreaking and they are so small compared to the impact of having property-driven taxes funding schools around this country. And I just feel like I need to put that out there tonight because it's a national issue. It's not just here. And finally, I would like to say that librarians in this country are under the gun, as we all know. And the idea of cutting one is just so incredible to me because they are literally preserving our rights to free speech and education every single day, not to mention being de facto mental health advocates and mentors. Thank you very much.
conclude our public comment, I think. Oh, that was an
They
error.
were the last two students,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Either one of you come up as you see fit.
Hello, my name is Mime Cade. I'm a junior at Concord High School. I am the president of the Orchestra Council. I have been awarded 5th chair in the first violin section in the All-State. I have won 3rd place in the American Young Classical Musician Award, and I've been invited to perform in Italy. I have been involved in the Concord School Orchestras since 5th grade. I moved to Concord after living in 3 different countries. I started playing the violin when I was 7 years old due to opportunities given from my school. And since then, the violin has helped me grow as a person. Music is not only an art, but a universal language. I was able to communicate with people of different backgrounds and languages from music alone. Music is not only just a source of joy in my life, but also a source of protection and community. I am so grateful to have been introduced to music at elementary school and for my school to have given me such opportunities. The best time to start music is elementary school. The earlier, the better. And so that's why I'm going to say, please do not take these opportunities away from the students of the Concord Elementary Schools. Thank you.
And our final speaker.
I was not planning to speak, so please bear with me as I read my scribbles.
Your name and address if you
Oh
don't
yeah,
mind.
my name is Leah Greenberg. I live on 86 Prairie Street in Concord. I'm also in the high school music program, and I was in the 1st, 4th grade band at Thoreau Elementary School. I'm also a babysitter, and one of the girls I babysit is 9 years old, and she just started playing the violin. When I came over, she was struggling with math, so I suggested we take a break, and she showed me what she was doing on the violin, and her face just lit up. She has a really busy schedule, like a lot of kids her age, and I don't know if she would have picked up the violin if she had started in 6th grade or later. Also, COVID happened. Like you were saying, most of the kids in the system had 3 years that were interrupted, and they were isolated from each other, our community, and our schools. As you said, we're in a mental health crisis, partially as a result of COVID. Well, what can we do to build community and help mental health? Well, music brings people together. The 9-year-old I babysit was looking forward to a mini concert she was doing at her school. She makes friends there. It's where I made friends too when I was her age and continue to do so. If we want to rebuild a stronger community and stronger schools after COVID, we need music. And also, please do not cut teacher salaries. I love my teachers, and we need them. So yeah.
I know this meeting is really long, but I do, if any of our committee members wanted to weigh in on this discussion, and I'd like to give sort of everyone the opportunity, I'll sort of go down the line. Cynthia, do you have anything you want to add?
We have a lot to talk about at our next meeting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of issues were raised, and I think I need to think about them for a while, and I hope people were taking note of all of the questions and comments from the public. I just want to make it very clear that we did not vet any of those recommended cuts. And in fact, I would have a strong opposition.
You need a microphone, Cynthia.
We particularly did not discuss them. And in fact, I would like to, I don't think they should have been presented as part of this presentation tonight.
Sorry, we were directly asked by the FinCom to bring them today.
But those were not school committee recommendations. I just want to make it very clear, the school committee did not discuss any of those recommendations at all.
Okay, we'll make a note of that.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
It's important to the public to understand. We just had no discussion about them. I mean, everybody would concur, we did not discuss them, right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, okay.
I think that was intentional because we didn't want to weigh in prematurely.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I would echo what Ms. Rainey said. There's an implication in this list that this is under debate at the school committee level, and it most certainly is not. We have yet to enter into discussion on where the budget's going to go from here. Number two, I want to thank the FinCom. I don't envy you. It's hard work every year. This year is notably hard, I think. So thank you. And thirdly, thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight or came tonight. This is unusual, and we're glad you're here. Thank you. And I think, like the FinCom and like the school committee, you too are going to share the challenges that are before us. You know that. That's why you're here. Thank you.
So I just have a few thoughts. One being, I can't reiterate enough that special education is clearly kind of the main story here. And we do have a requirement to provide our students with these services. These are kids. I know you guys think in numbers. I think in kids. That's just who I am. You know, we did not discuss that list of reductions, but in order to get your guideline, there's nothing else to cut. So that is the list the superintendent brought to us. We haven't discussed it, but I think that's what you're seeing is that's the only way to see it. I look at all of the students that came here tonight, they're a product of our K-8 schools. And here they sit in high school, they are well-spoken, their teachers have taught them well. I think that they should actually be running our meetings because they do a really nice job with it. But know that we're raising people and we do all have a shared responsibility in the kids of this town. We all pay property taxes, we live here, we get it, but we do have an obligation to the students that live within this district. And I understand your responsibility is also great and you're looking out the taxpayer, but as a school committee member, I will only speak for myself. I am here to advocate for the needs of the school system, being the superintendent's budget that she brought to us. And this is just, speaking just on behalf of myself, this is where we're at. So thank you.
Carrie? Yeah, thank you all this has obviously been a very long meeting. I appreciate all the level of detail that you are willing to go into to get to where we are, I guess. And I also appreciate that you're having to balance the needs of the entire town and of which we are one component. So thank you for really digging in and listening to all the different aspects of this. Our job is to advocate for what's best for students with an eye towards the impact on a taxpayer, of which we all are taxpayers. And since this budget is certainly an increase, but it's not an unprecedented increase. And it is a level service budget. It is not a budget that has fluff in it. This is a budget that is going to simply continue the services that we are currently offering our students and families and our entire community. So this is a level service budget at a time when student needs are exceptionally high. And I do want to just respectfully challenge one sentiment that I heard a number of times that that things are going well. The data is showing that things are going well. And that is actually a testament to, yes, our teachers, our administrators, to all the incredible work that has gone into our students in schools. But at the same time, things are not all right. Things are not fine. I mean, if you look at this mental health crisis page, I mean, the fact that 27% of kids felt depressed high school kids felt depressed over the last 2 weeks, or even worse, have thought about self-harm, is not just shocking, but it's not okay. So I think based on what Dr. Hunter has presented, what we as a committee have talked about a number of times, like this, we have to make really critical, really tough cuts if we have to go deeper. And that is, in my opinion, I don't think that's in the best interest of our community at this time. So thank you.
Yeah, you sort of brought my favorite question of the night, which is like, can we talk about things that we need? Can we compartmentalize things that we need versus things that we want? And before I was on school committee, I had like no idea really about how much of our budget is not just things we need, but there's another layer. We are legally obligated to provide. And that, shocked me. I think, not to get waxed too philosophical, I think there's a debate to be had about how much in our country, federally, statewide, we tether to the schools for delivery of services. That's unfortunately not a debate we can have in this room because the laws are the way they are now. So when I look at the big chunk of our budget, it is the delivery of basic needs. And then when I looked at, I forget which page it is, but like when you look at our proposed budget and the categories that we looked at, out of district tuitions, we have real dollars, $135,000 more. We don't get to choose that. $108,000 more we're projecting for utilities. I think we all agree we need to keep the lights on. And then, so right there, and then, the 206,000 in supplies and materials, that's really like inflation. So right there, that's 449,000. Like there's a big giant chunk of the delta that we're all talking about. That's a huge chunk of this 585. And there's just not a lot there. And again, these are things we're obligated to. So I don't know who it was that said, that we really, I think, have cut this thing to the bone from our perspective of what are we doing to deliver needs. And then, and then you get into the wants, right? And that's where things become tricky because we have a strategic plan that had a tremendous amount of community buy-in, not just from students and parents and teachers, but from the extended community. So there are expectations of what we're going to deliver. And sometimes, even though the wants maybe might seem like wants, when you stop delivering those things and they fly sort of in the face of what you've laid out in the strategic plan, number one, and two, what your community collectively has come to expect of the schools, I think for a lot of people, there's going to be debate as to what a want is versus what a need is. And that stinks for us. That makes it really hard. So I think that's just where we are. And, speaking again to these really horrifying statistics of where kids are and if they really are in classrooms ready to learn or not, that's getting them to a place where they are ready to learn in their hearts and minds is a huge challenge. And sadly, I think there's dollars and cents to that. As I said to Parashar, even though I think our metrics are great, we're achieving at high rates, or all of our metrics are kind of where we want them. But to maintain that, sadly, in this environment that we're in, and I don't think Concord's unique, I think this is all across the country, it requires more dollars. Does that stink? Yeah. But is that our reality? Also, yeah. And again, I just go back to it's very challenging when so much of what we're doing is legally mandated, where we don't really have choices here. So that's sort of where I plead with you as you guys are examining things to kind of take that all into account and recognize that a lot of the work has been done by Dr. Hunter and her team already to get us to a place where we're not really talking about wants, but I don't know. We all have discussions to be had, I know, and town meeting isn't too far away, so.
Let me, and I know Peggy wants to close, but I'll just say a couple words. So first of all, I appreciate all the work and effort that goes on. I said it earlier, not only among the teachers, the leadership, the school committee, the parents, et cetera. And it's not a one-time event. I recognize that, and it's continuous. And I've seen it over the last few years that I've been on the FinCom, frankly. So I don't think, hopefully none of our comments and questions are taken as you're not doing enough, number one. Right. Number two, I want to actually bring it back to the higher level in terms of the cost structure, where it's been and where it's going. As I started off, it's been, it was 3.7 going down to 2.8. I thought that was good news. So curious how we're going to do that. If it's 4%, that's okay too. Again, I'm not here to dictate line items. I think Don said it well. It's up to you guys to do that. But if it is going to be 4%, we should have an offline conversation about updating those cost trends, because I think it's important for the residents of the town to know that they can expect a 4% increase, plus or minus whatever, for the next 4 to 5 years. Because again, our job is to make recommendations to the town around the financial health, to stability of the town. And that includes town spending,
capital and operating, school spending, capital operating, et cetera. And so as part of that, I think it's our obligation to tell the town, we financially, we may be in a great place now, but there are some yellow flags or red flags coming up and what those are. And then the town can decide and the residents can decide whether they want to pay an extra $1,000 a year or $500 a year, right? It's only our recommendation. It's the school committee's recommendation. If we can get to one place, great. If we can't, then citizens have to make choices, right? So I appreciate everything that's gone into it. I don't know whether you'll have further discussions around all the questions or not, but at a minimum, it would be helpful if we can just get together and align on the 5-year cost estimates, right? Because I think it's important information that we need to deliver to the town. Just like we did last year with the town and the school 5-year projections, we'd like to do that again. And again, just so that we can, again, give some strategic sense of what directions we're going. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peggy and Alexa for
Swift adjournment.
A brief
Thank you.
a very brief closing statement. Thank you very much for spending this amount of time with us, the committee, everyone in the audience, our own committee. Clearly we do have a structural problem, and costs are increasing. I would just say two things in closing. Please don't take budget reductions at the high school off the table. If there's room there, that will also save our taxpayers money. I know it's not the same kind of offset because it's the region, we have Carlisle, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure they'll be pushing for some reductions, but there's, that as a taxpayer, to me, that's an offset to the CPS. So don't turn your eyeballs off of that as a total gimme. And I hope that we can find, some reductions on your side. I hope that our committee has heard the difficulty and the amount of work that you've already done in your budget. And I would prefer that we can go to town meeting with a single number, which we did do last year. Is that correct?
We did.
Yeah, we did. So hopefully we can do that again. So, thank you.
Should we move to adjourn? We do it in.
No, you just announced, this meeting is adjourned.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
I learned that you don't have to move or vote on adjournment. You just adjourn.